and then take the roll, please.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman. Taking roll for December 7th of the Joint Appropriations Committee, the first day of agency hearings for the supplemental budget of the 2021-2022 biennium. Representative Kinner.
Here in Sheridan.
Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Olson.
Here.
Representative Schwartz.
Here.
Representative Summers.
Here.
Representative Walters.
He's here.
Here.
Senator Agar.
He's excused. He'll be joining us just a little later.
Senator Garou.
Here.
Senator Hicks, or excuse me, Senator Kinski.
Here.
Senator Bebout.
Here.
Oh, he's here.
Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Here.
And Chairman for the day, Vice Chair Senator Hicks.
All right. With that, I just have a couple opening remarks that I'd like to, I think we all recognize the unprecedented challenges before us, but I'm reminded that, through all challenges and there's always an opportunity. And I actually have spent a lot of time thinking about this. And I think we're actually afforded an opportunity to have a discussion that probably periodically government should have. What is the right size of government? What's the right role of government, and what should government cost? And so while I look at this as a great challenge going into this supplemental, I also look at it as an opportunity for us to step up to the plate and have those discussions with the people of the state of Wyoming and the other branches of government. So I look at this much more as an opportunity, as a challenge. We'll come through this. We always have and we always will in this country. And I think we'll be better on the back end when we get through this than we are going into it today. With that, I turn it over to Co-Chair Nicholas. If you have any comments, and then after that, any members of the committee. So Bob, what's your thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So first of all, welcome everybody. It's good to see your faces. Welcome all those who are in attendance via YouTube. Welcome Governor Gordon, it's good to see you. I hope you're feeling much better. So we are, as all of you on the screen know, we're doing this virtual. So this is the first time the Joint Appropriations Committee has conducted these type of hearings on a virtual setting. We'll be interviewing and reviewing each of the agencies that have a modification or supplement to their general fund dollars, and that were basically part of the budget reductions that were implemented by the governor beginning in July 1. It's going to be an interesting and difficult transition for all of us to listen, to review the documents, and to ask questions as we walk through the next 2 weeks. So please bear with us as we kind of experiment on how to do this and how to take take views, have questions. It might be a bit cumbersome for the get-go, but we're all excited to do it, and it's going to be a good challenge for us. Governor Gordon, I just want to say that thank you for doing all the heavy lifting. Basically we started in May in June of what looked like $877 million deficit on the general fund side that we'll be addressing primarily through these hearings. That number, because of your actions and a few other things, has now gone down to between 150 and 250 million, depending on how you count the numbers and how you move dollars around. But so in essence, most of the heavy lifting is done. And so we have some work to do. We have some rearranging perhaps to do, but you've set the model for us and kind of the guideposts that are going to help us through the next 2 weeks. And so thank you for your time and effort. This is not going to be an easy task for the agencies or for us. And quite honestly, even though the original step 2 cuts have been implemented, I think because of the COVID situation, because of COVID relief dollars and other things, we have yet to feel the real burden, and the citizens of Wyoming have yet to feel the real burden of what's in store for them. The times are unprecedented. The budget cuts are going to be the greatest monetarily in Wyoming history. We still have significant issues to deal with education, and then we have declining revenues in front of us, which will some point in time where we all know we're going to have to readdress the distribution and how we obtain our revenues. And so we are at the beginning of a long road for the Wyoming State Legislature and the people of Wyoming. And it will be a challenging and interesting times, and we look forward with working with you. And so welcome. Thank you.
I would ask the committee, any committee members have anything they'd want to say? If not, I don't see any hands. Governor Gordon, you have the, I don't know if it's the floor. What do you call a Zoom meeting? But whatever it is, you've got it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. It is an honor to be with you this morning. And thank you very much for your kind words that actually really should go to agency directors as well. I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to present a supplemental budget for 21-22. And I'd like to start off by thanking the budget division and agency directors for their hard work over this year. This has been a tough year, as Co-Chairman Nicholas pointed out, for everyone, and it has been compounded by producing 2 rounds of cuts in just 6 months. It is excruciating to do that once a year, but let alone twice. And then you think about the logistics that we're speaking about here, doing this on Zoom and virtually, it becomes even more obvious how difficult this has been. But I want to say that Wyoming's agency heads rose to the challenge, and they have my unending thanks. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, because of the circumstances, I have not been able to get back to my office, so I'm happy to have both my Chief of Staff, Buck McVeigh, and Erica here to answer more specific questions that you might have. My proposed supplemental budget meets my statutory requirement to present a balanced budget and my commitment to the Wyoming people to live within our means. My approach to the supplemental budget begins by respecting, first and foremost, what is constitutionally mandated, then seeks to safeguard the health, welfare, and liberties of all Wyoming citizens. This budget proposes a smaller, but it will be a weaker government with less capacity than it has had before. I don't do this because it's something I relish, but because I believe this is what we can afford at this time. There are those who will disagree with our proposals, but I have tried to preserve the best of Wyoming. She has provided for so many, and I lament the very cuts that we have to make in order to balance this budget in light of new, vastly reduced expectations for future revenue. Nonetheless, Mr. Chairman, as you point out, this is also an opportunity to right-size government and think differently about it. This proposed supplemental budget reflects that new reality, though, of diminished future revenues. It brings forth approximately $515 million in reductions and an elimination of 380 state positions. Please bear in mind that there will be many more positions and people cut at community colleges, the University of Wyoming, and from contracts with private companies throughout Wyoming, which depend on those state contracts. I am acutely aware that this proposal will reduce services that the people of Wyoming count on, and that it will further weaken our economy, as well as compromise our ability to rebound rapidly and in time. I do not look forward to what will come should you pass this supplement, but it is a responsible proposal nonetheless. I wish we were in better position for these times, but I do believe we are in better position than many of our peer states. Nonetheless, these are difficult times to be sure. And if we must face them, I am honored and proud to face them with you and the state employees we have. They have stepped up and shouldered a tremendous burden, and my thanks goes to them. This committee knows what has happened to revenues and where they are likely to go. Just a few days ago, I had two conversations with major coal producers, about the challenges they are facing and their likely response to those challenges. Lighthouse Resources, you may be familiar with, which owns the coal port in Longview, Washington, has recently filed for bankruptcy. And just last week, we heard more disappointing news that the Decker mine, employing hundreds of people in Sheridan County, announced that it is going into bankruptcy. This year and last, Wyoming has seen mine after mine file for bankruptcy, lay off workers, and downsize their operations as they restructured. These have concerned counties and citizens alike. Wyoming has worked to respond responsibly. The negative trend in coal also exists for oil and gas, where Wyoming struggles to be competitive with other regions in the new price regimen. It is a trend that is not easily remedied and may be problematic for the long term. There may be some hope for natural gas, to be sure, as markets work their magic, but commodity prices are inherently volatile. We knew all these things last year, and we're taking steps to address them. But the global pandemic has accelerated the structural declines that we saw coming. The best things that we can do to improve Wyoming's competitiveness will be to decrease the tax burden we place on our mineral industries. Those are the very lifeblood of Wyoming's revenue. But we must also bear in mind that Wyoming's natural resource production pays the lion's share of our bills. This committee knows better than most that one cannot cut $500 million out of our budget without touching 5 crucial agencies: the Department of Health, the University of Wyoming, the Department of Corrections, the Department of Family Services, and community colleges. Together, these make up 2/3 of the entire general fund budget. Looking at healthcare in particular, the problem becomes even more pronounced. Here, there are only a few programs which make up the bulk of the Department of Health's budget. And yet, it is here where the main programs for healthcare coverage for the disabled and low income, mental health, substance abuse treatment, and developmental preschools reside. Other expensive missions include services for seniors, children's vaccinations, and facilities that provide direct care for Wyoming's most vulnerable populations, the State Hospital and the Life Resource Center. Some of these programs are disproportionately funded with federal matches, so that $1 of state could well eliminate $3 of services. Some of these federal programs are further burdened with maintenance of effort agreements, meaning the state is obliged to continue funding certain programs at an agreed upon rate. An example of this exists for you to consider: the proposed reduction of state spending on the Part B developmental preschool program risks a future loss of federal education dollars. Please be assured that my proposed cuts of nearly $135 million to this agency were informed by the agency. After careful consideration, they advised these cuts would minimize the negative impact on citizens in Wyoming. Still, the harsh reality is that we cannot reduce spending without causing some further hardship for seniors, people with disabilities, and those suffering from mental illness and substance addictions. These are really tough decisions that cut services to elderly, which may help them age in home, decrease healthcare coverage for children, cut Medicaid payments to providers, and reduce community mental health and substance abuse services to those in need. In this time of COVID, that is especially troublesome for those suffering with increased depression, hopelessness, and isolation during the pandemic. None of this is easy, and we are doing our best to pick up the slack elsewhere. Regardless, people's lives will be affected. COVID-19 has not made any of these decisions easy. This pandemic has placed significant stresses on our already struggling healthcare system. It will only get worse if hospitalizations continue to rise. We have been fortunate so far to be able to support hospitals and other providers with some CARES Act funding and other federal dollars. But those opportunities end at the end of this month, absent congressional action. I want you to know that I hate everything about the choices we have had to make. These that I have outlined are just a few of those that will impact people that we all care about. Unfortunately, all of these decisions are tough and will have consequences. Still, together as legislators and the executive, I believe we can work together to determine how best to move forward. We did that a year ago when we passed the standard budget. The budget I proposed this past session and you passed kept spending low, slowed the pace of capital construction, and limited the use of savings. We put in place a budget that positioned Wyoming for the challenges we saw then and gave us time to consider how to restructure our government. No one could have foreseen what was coming next. So much has changed since March. Nevertheless, this proposed supplemental budget is designed to have Wyoming live within her means and yet respond to the historic budget shortfall we face. Moreover, I believe this budget must look well beyond the next 18 months and recognize the challenge of years to come. Wyoming people deserve nothing less. Let me say emphatically that these proposals are not meant to inflict pain on the public or diminish economic opportunity. Far be it from us to do that. We have struggled very hard to make sure that we don't do more than we absolutely have to. On the contrary, we did our best to make sure that Wyoming citizens were well served. However, we must also recognize that state government is already lean, and that means that programs and agencies we value and know are important may well become unsustainable. I do not want to leave the impression that Wyoming is not without opportunity. It is just that we are going to have to work harder to capitalize on it. This budget does contain capacity for economic recovery. The Wyoming Business Council, even while working to distribute a larger proportion of CARES funding to Wyoming businesses than any of our peer states, has just recruited yet another new business to Wyoming. This one to Uinta County. And there are others who have been looking to Wyoming for opportunity in places like Sheridan County, Campbell County, Park County, Laramie and Albany counties, and Fremont counties. The Business Council is positioning Wyoming to diversify our economy, and thus I propose maintaining some funding for that agency to capitalize on market changes happening now and the ability to provide grants to communities to attract those businesses and the jobs they bring. We have found efficiencies where we could and incorporated those into this proposal. Already, state government is smaller, shedding more than 1,600 jobs over the past 10 years. We have asked Wyoming employees to step up their contributions to employees' group health insurance as a result of our conversations with you earlier this year. Still, our need to reduce spending by $515 million cannot be achieved by nibbling around the edges, hoping to find improvements in the delivery of the same services. Programs must go. More jobs will have to go. Nearly 1/2 of Wyoming's state workforce lives somewhere else in the state other than Cheyenne. So that means jobs in our communities will also be affected. Fewer people shopping on our main streets, eating at our restaurants, and coaching kids in our sports. This proposed supplemental budget does spell change for all Wyoming communities. Last Friday, I heard from county commissioners about how much a cut of 10% of the direct distribution will hurt our more rural communities. Places like Crook, Weston, and Niobrara counties will be affected. I explained that the reason I made that proposed cut from the LISRA was because of my growing concern that spending from the rainy day account is unsustainable. The LISRA backstops so much of our state spending already. School construction, school foundation expenditures, Hathaway, and others are all backstopped to some degree by the rainy day account. Even so, the proposed cuts I bring you and some slight improvements in revenues move what was a $1.5 billion deficit in May down to nearly $300 million today. The remaining shortfall comes from the cost of K-12 education and will be covered with dollars from the rainy day fund. You likely have updates showing more precise numbers, but in 2 years, the deficit in K-12 education could grow to as much as 600 million. Pardon the pun, if you will, there is no governor on the pace of school spending. Nevertheless, I believe a well-funded education system is essential to Wyoming's future. It is a source of pride and economic opportunity for our state, and it is essential for our families and our children, just as low taxes are. But our circumstances require that we evaluate all school spending. Without changing our current statutory construct, we cannot slow spending until the LISRA is unable to meet its commitment. And at that point, the superintendent can prorate whatever remains. It is cruise control set on 80 on an icy road, and it must be fixed. One area where I can make recommendations about school funding is to the Wyoming Military Department's Youth Challenge Program. Although I am most reluctant to do it, I have proposed its elimination. Even though, as a program, it has been successful and benefited teenagers who struggle to find a productive way forward, it is not core to the Wyoming Guard's mission, nor does it improve readiness or help recruitment. It is one place where I can reduce the draw on the school foundation account. But it isn't easy. Cutting the program will lay off nearly 50 people in Guernsey. But this is a program without a proper home. That being said, we have asked the military department to hold one more class in the spring. This may have to be delayed for COVID-19 reasons, but I'm asking that it be funded long enough to allow the last class to fully complete the program and to also allow for all funding needed to close the facility. I will be providing a governor's letter asking that this extension in funding be considered if you choose to accept my recommended cut to this program. A few other items that I'd like to highlight. Just as I cannot unilaterally cut school spending, as governor, I cannot unilaterally raise new revenues. We are working to diversify our income and business climate while also modernizing our traditional industries and keeping them competitive. But even these have no direct way of contributing substantially to our revenues under our current tax structure. Still, I can point to areas where Wyoming can consider action. A first step might well be the re-examination and possible elimination of some of our exemptions. These could raise $200 million for the state and another $200 million for local governments annually. Exemptions benefit many citizens and make Wyoming attractive for certain industries, but they must be considered in light of their overall value. As mentioned, this budget shortfall hits local governments too. And that is why I want to bring up again the opportunity for local governments, communities, and counties, which are blessed with reserves built up over time from extractive industries. These reserves can be put to better use than they currently are allowed in statute. Thus, I propose to you that you consider legislation that will allow local governments to invest in equities. This would mean the creation of a WyoStar 3 program, which was previously discussed when I was state treasurer. This alone will bring new revenues for some cities, towns, and counties, as well as help bolster some community centers that have set up endowments for the purpose of maintenance. As we consider local impacts, I want to point out one area where I did minimize cuts. When it comes to the safety of our people and the support for victims of crime, I have drawn the line. I have not cut the budgets of the offices of the Attorney General, the Public Defender, or the district attorneys in Cheyenne and Casper anywhere near the same extent as I have cut other agencies. You will hear directly from the district attorney, but because of the policy implication of their budget cuts, I have tried to preserve much of their step 3 funding, not only for victims of crime and for criminal activities, but also because of the challenges a new administration may pose to the state. Nevertheless, perhaps it is time for a more uniform approach to funding county prosecution, one where local support is more direct. In every other county without a district attorney, Wyoming provides support to county attorneys to aid with their prosecution. State-funded county district attorneys might now be a luxury that we can no longer afford. Lastly, I want to highlight that this supplemental budget proposes a new architecture for the state's fiscal apparatus. Rather than an assortment of coffee cans, tips, drips, and splits, I have proposed a budget that is predicated on the principle of simplify, simplify, simplify. Wyoming should seek to have one savings account and one checkbook outside of her income generating permanent funds. This budget sets us on a course for one checkbook and one savings account by eliminating the strategic investments and project account. This account was the child of a compromise between the executive and legislative branches back when the state had extra income. That time is gone. Thank you for considering that proposal and for all the care you take while reviewing this proposed supplemental budget. These are truly difficult times, and our circumstances call for us to act responsibly, intelligently, with foresight, and for the benefit of our state and future generations. I pass this proposal to you now, knowing that despite alarming shortfalls in income, as a state, we can still face our challenges without panic, but with purpose. And those conclude my remarks, Mr. Chairman. I do have one other thing for your consideration, which I'll bring to your attention now. My concern, and I've spoken with our congressional delegation about the possibility of further stimulus, which, as we know, has been an ongoing discussion without finishing that discussion throughout most of the year. Our CARES Act funding will stop on December 30th, and I have an absolute belief that at some point in the coming year, Congress will pass further stimulus. Therefore, I have suggested to a few of you the possibility of repurposing the large project loan, the balance of the large project loan fund, to be used as a bridge facility for businesses in what I consider to be our most challenging months ahead, January, February, and March. And I would be glad to discuss with you some particulars. This is a concept that I bring to your attention, but my concern is that we not leave our Wyoming businesses high and dry during a time when we are going to see substantial challenges. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I stand for questions.
Thank you, Governor. Any committee, any questions for the governor? Senator Kinski.
Thank you, Governor Gordon. It's good to see you, and our prayers continue for you and your family and a rapid recovery. I was interested in your comments on the school districts, K-12, and you said 80 miles an hour on an icy road. I didn't hear anything specific as to what you thought might be done. Could you share with us your thinking in that regard? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, and Senator Kinski. I believe that your committee can look at that statutory construct, which really does not propose any way. It simply proposes backstopping whatever the spend rate is. And I think you should maybe take that up and consider, are there ways that we can reduce spending on schools over time that allows for an orderly progression, not as opposed to a cliff. Senator Kinski, I believe those are discussions that are appropriate for the Joint Appropriations Committee.
Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Governor, welcome, and thanks for all your hard work. Make no mistake, we the people appreciate your work. And so thank you. And on school funding, since we're there and you talk about cutting K-12, shouldn't we also be looking for some revenue K-12? I mean, there's two ways to fix it. You can cut and you can find new revenue. So should it just be all cuts, or should it be a combination of both, Governor?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, Representative Summers, I believe that any responsible discussion about school funding will have to look at all aspects of school funding, revenues as well as efficiencies as well as cuts. My particular concern is that at present, the rate of spend is underpinned by the legislative stabilization reserve account. And without some understanding of how long that lasts and what the consequences will be once it's fully expended, education could be in for a very devastating change of circumstance.
Senator Guru, you're muted. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Good morning, Governor. I too hope you're feeling better. You and Jeannie both, the First Lady both. I wanted to ask about what you talked about here at the end about CARES Act funding and large project accounts. I know that the Endurance Fund has been oversubscribed. I know that there was some talk about transfers to that fund. Is that fund going to be able to be funded from remaining CARES Act funding? Is that what you're talking about with the large project account, or is that something separate? And just kind of flesh that out a little bit for me, if you could, please.
Thank you, Senator Guru, and Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. The large project loan fund, I'll speak about in just a second. It's a separate entity. It is a Wyoming entity. And I'll come back to that in a second. To your question about the Endurance Fund and its oversubscription, absolutely, it is oversubscribed. And as we wind out the year, and you'll have the opportunity to speak to Buck and Erica, you'll have more precise knowledge about how we are planning to be able to more fully fund the Endurance Fund as we come to the close of the year. We just, as the State Loan and Investment Board, finished our work last Friday on local government spending, and there will be also tribal funds that will maybe be put to use. What I want you to know is that whatever funds are not expended by the 30th must be returned to the federal government. We have every confidence that every dollar will be spent at present, and I think you'll be able to go through this today with some of my staff. We have everything accounted for with a possibility of about $300+ thousand dollars that is kind of an overlap, but they'll have more detail on that. Senator, what I am proposing is that as the CARES Act deadline looms on the 30th, and if Congress does not pass an extension of the PPP program or some other stimulus in the early part of 2021, Wyoming businesses are not going to have access to any of the programs you passed this spring or any federal dollars. Several years ago, when I was treasurer, we established a program using a constitutional provision that was at the time known as Amendment 4. We set it up you may remember, to help with Cody Labs. Initially, it has funded Atlas Carbon in Campbell County, and it is a program that uses Amendment $4, so it's not part of the permanent fund. They are funds that can be put at risk. And I believe that there is a percentage of that fund still available. What I'm recommending is that on a very short-term basis, that we provide an avenue to allow for our banks to be able to extend credit for businesses as a bridge facility, just to get them to whenever Congress gets their dollars finished.
Follow up, Mr. Vice Chair?
Go ahead.
So thank you, Governor. So you'd see that as kind of a takeoff on the EIDL money, some kind of short-term loan that would go through our banking system in terms like that. That's how we'd set that up.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, Senator Guru, that is sort of my notion. I've spoken with Senator Perkins about this idea, and let me point out one reason why I'm trying to suggest it the way I am. As you know, the CARES dollars were federal dollars that were sort of given to us to help make sure businesses stayed viable. We tried to make sure that those dollars were easily accessible and that they were rapidly deployed. Senator Kinski has written me recently about some challenges with, whether all of those dollars were used in state, whether they were all appropriately expended. We did have a pretty robust system, but we are auditing those dollars. And we want to make sure that those were spent appropriately. What I'm recommending is really a place where we know that our Wyoming banks already know the credit risks that are associated with businesses that are going to come to them. We want them to do the underwriting as opposed to the state to do the underwriting. And we believe that there's an opportunity to make sure those dollars are secure because they are Wyoming dollars, and that they are appropriately funded under a circumstance.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
Committee, any more questions for Governor? Co-Chairman Nicholas? You're muted. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. A couple questions, Governor. First of all, you mentioned governor's letters. Can you tell us when you anticipate we will receive those governor's letters?
Mr. Co-Chairman, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I believe we will start delivering those letters over the course of the next month. Some of it will be determined by the pace and structure of your conversations. I think it's important that we make sure that you have a full understanding from the agencies, as you've pointed out, about the extent of these budget reductions.
And so thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Governor, it would be useful for us to get the gist of what those letters are as we proceed through the next week and the following week. Just so that we can help you and as we formulate our, we'll come up with something by the end of next week, but if we have some general guidelines or road signs, then we'll be less work when we have to come back. So that was the purpose of that question. With regards to your the WyoStar 3, we'd be more than happy to sit down with your staff, sit down with the Treasurer's Office, and sit down either through JAC and CapFin or both to resurrect where we left off several years ago on the WyoStar 3 and that program to allow investments in equities. And we're also doing some other things with that you're aware of. So we welcome that opportunity. And Don Richards put that on our agenda, and we'll talk about that as soon as we have an opportunity to do it. You mentioned the large projects accounts. And I think that's a great idea. So Don, also with regards to the large projects accounts, could you please kind of reassemble it and have Legislative Service Office put together a memo for the members to kind of get back up to speed on what it is? Don, do you know offhand what the balance of the dollars is in that? And does the governor have the opportunity to be $11 into it? If we kind of come to a resolution on what dollars are in there, if we want to have transfers of other dollars into that account, if we can come up with a program on a short notice?
Mr. Chairman, we can get you the balance of that account. It is not subject to B11 as I understand it. In fact, it requires a supermajority vote for the expenditure of those funds.
And Governor, so do you have an, or does your staff know, Buck, what the balance is in that account now?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, I believe Erica may be able to provide that balance for you. There is a provision that allowed the governor to take a remainder of the challenged loan program to devote to that. And there may be a way to look at that as well.
Well, once again, Governor, I think it's a great idea. And if we can tie it into a backfill to use COVID dollars when they are back and help craft that language through the LSO to ensure that we capture whatever we can, we'd be more than happy to work with this. In general, Governor, could you take a moment and explain to us and to our viewers what specific reductions or amounts of reductions you did to your agency to address, we talk about cuts to other agencies, but what did you do with your office?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. That was crafted fairly quickly, and I think I will give that to Chief of Staff McVeigh and Erica to be more precise. We did take our full cut. So
I guess that Mr. Co-Chair, that was my question. I just want to point out that you're doing the same thing to yourself that you are imposing on others.
Mr. Chairman, this is Chief of Staff McVeigh. Erica just looked up the balance of the large project loan account, and it is currently standing at $20.7 million.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Committee members, any more questions for Governor Gordon? Well, Governor, I think you got off easy this morning, but we do appreciate your time. I look forward to working with your staff as we work through your budget and the other agency budget. And again, I want to reiterate from the Appropriations Committee, and I think Co-Chairman Nicholas hit it right on the head. You've done the heavy lifting. We've still got to deal with some additional items within your budget. K through 12 is going to be a discussion that we have to have with the state of Wyoming moving forward. But again, thank you for your efforts so far on this. I see Co-Chairman Nicholas has got his hand up, so I will turn it over to Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Co-Chairman Hicks. Just one other item, Governor, so could you just provide us with a short, quick update on the status of the COVID issues in Wyoming, and tell us what you have heard and what we might expect with regards to a vaccine? Because I hear different rumblings about it. I hear that the vaccine may start to be available within a few weeks. Kind of a little light at the end of the tunnel, but I'd appreciate if you could kind of bring us up to speed.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for that. And I believe actually probably there's a little bit better data that you can get from chief of staff, but essentially we believe that we will have around 5,000 doses potentially coming to Wyoming within the next week or so. And by the end of the year, about 15,000 doses total of the Pfizer, which is the one that requires a first shot, and then 21 days after that, another shot, and then immunity starts 2 weeks after that. Currently, the process is to drop ship that. The logistics are designed, through the state of Wyoming, but those shipments will be dropped to places that can receive the vaccine. Those places that need to make sure that they can keep it very cold. Chief of Staff, do you want to add some more? This is a very fast-moving target, and my last briefing was Friday.
Mr. Chairman, Governor, I'm going to have Rennie talk about this right now, if Director McKay is ready to go.
Go ahead, Rennie.
Oh, thank you very much. Generally, the COVID update is quite concerning. I think you probably get the news releases that go out related to fatalities and how concerning that is. Also, if you are on the Department of Health's website, you can track hospitalization and ICU utilization. Over the last few days, we hit the most ICU utilization that we've experienced this year, and hospitalizations are continuing to be very high. There's been a little bit of relief in the last couple of days, but we'll have a new update today too on hospitalizations. So the major concern is that if you also look at the White House data that the White House provides to each state weekly, every county, in the state right now is in their red zone, which means that spread of the virus is high, at the highest level that they have, and they've even actually added a second level within the red zone, and we have some counties in that zone. So this means high transmission is happening, and we're talking about 2,000 cases per 100,000 people over the last 14 days, or a 20% test positivity rate. It is a very concerning situation. As Chairman Nicholas brought up, the vaccine, I think, provides some very positive news that we are, with, I think, extra diligence in the coming weeks, we have a chance to really take a good shot at this virus, and as the vaccine starts to arrive. So the committee that will approve the Pfizer as the first vaccine in the pipeline, and behind that, about a week behind it, is the Moderna vaccine. But the committee federally that will approve of Pfizer, or could approve it, is scheduled to meet this week on the 10th. And if that approval comes, then there could be shipments immediately out to every state. And what we've been told is that the first shipment would arrive in Wyoming within 24 hours. And it does not come to Cheyenne, it does not come to the state, it goes directly to where the state assigns that vaccine to go. And that would be in this first wave. We are talking about trying to get this to healthcare workers. So this is not something that we should also say that the vaccine is close and that will be an immediate relief, but it will be a relief for healthcare workers and first responders. That's the target with this first round. And then we are still over a month away from having the direct relief from that vaccine, because it is a 2-stage vaccine, and because then there is time after the second shot, the second dose, before the vaccine is effective. So we really do need to just have, I think, as big an effort from the people of the state to make a big push over the next month and a month and a half, because that, with the vaccine potentially arriving as soon as next week in Wyoming for healthcare providers, and then having a month to a month and a half after that arrival where that vaccine would be effective, that there is a chance for us to really, with, I think, again, extra diligence from people, businesses, government, and the vaccine, we could be entering the last few months of this if we can really make a big push. But it is months away before the vaccine will be widely available. So I think we're probably talking about the spring.
So follow up, Mr.
Governor,
Co-Chair.
if I may, Governor, and I don't know if you have one of the staff take this, but could you give us just the logistical format of the distribution plan within Wyoming? I'm particularly interested in, given the nature of the vaccine, and it's got to be maintained very cold temperatures. So once we get past this first, the healthcare workers and our ICU unit facilities and stuff. So what is going to be the process then for distribution, and then how those decisions are made, and particularly as it gets out to the rural areas in the next 3, 4, 5 months? Is it anticipated that people are going to have to travel to regional facilities to get the vaccine? But if you can just kind of lay out that procedure as it becomes available, how does your office then prioritize and then facilitate, and what does that decision-making process look like?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee. I will leave that to Rennie
Okay.
to discuss. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Rainey, you want to go ahead and answer that, and then we'll take some more questions?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. On the Department of Health's website, there is the draft vaccine distribution plan, so people can see it right now if you'd like, and we'll make sure we get a link over to all of you with that right now as well. But in terms of so there's 2 vaccines that will be likely arriving out across the country this month, and one is Pfizer that does have that super cold requirement to keep it frozen, and then once it is thawed, there's about 5 days that it can be administered and remain safe. There are enough facilities in the right places in hospitals and county health offices around the state to be able to have direct distribution within different sectors of the state and hold that. Pfizer one, the Moderna is the second one, and it does not have that same requirement. So it will be able to be distributed into more rural areas and held there. But the Department of Health, the Office of Homeland Security, local health offices, hospitals have all been preparing for this for months. And so they have plans ready now to work between the facilities that have the necessary freezers for the Pfizer vaccine to be able to hold it, and then work with their partners and surrounding communities to be able to get that out into every community in the state, so it can be administered quickly. And then we'll get a boost when Moderna is available. And if everything again goes well on these 2 approvals and planning, that's about a week behind Pfizer. So we should be hearing a lot more. We'll know more by we'll know more by Friday about exactly what's happening with these and how quickly they'll be in Wyoming. And then next week we'll be hearing more about Moderna. But local officials in terms of establishing, I think, Mr. Chairman, your question was also about the planning on this. The local communities that will be receiving it are working with those priority populations. And there's a task force of healthcare ethicists that was the goal, to try to bring people together to establish that priority list of who would be in the priority populations, because the state does have influence on who gets the vaccine first. And there have been recommendations from the federal government that came out last week as well. So considering federal guidance, considering local input, there's a list, and the priority populations is in that draft plan that's on the website. If you search for Wyoming COVID vaccine plan, you'll get right to it as well if you're trying to do that now, but we'll deliver it to you shortly.
All right, thank you, Randy. I had a question from Co-Chairman Nicholas and then Representative Larson. You're muted, Co-Chairman.
Yeah, my question was answered. Thank you.
All right. Representative Larson, you still have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Just with a little indulgence, Governor, I just think we'd be remiss as a committee if we didn't acknowledge the fact that nobody that I've ever seen in my elected career has had to stand in the face of the decisions that you're having to make on a daily basis. And you and Dr. Harris, that has not been easy, and you haven't had any cover to duck behind as the bullets and whatever the rocks are thrown at you. Just know of our respect for standing up and continuing to make decisions with sometimes very little information, but with the best concerns of Wyoming at the forefront. So we recognize that, and you have our respect for it.
Well said, Representative Larson. Any more questions for the governor or staff? Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this may have been answered, but I lost my connection briefly and was out of the meeting for a moment. Rennie, when you talk about doses, and I'm going to use your initial shipment dose of 5,000 doses, does that mean 5,000 would get vaccinated, or does that mean 2,500 because it's a two-step dosing process?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Rennie.
Thank you. The ideal is that there will be multiple shipments happening over the coming months, and so the plan this time would be to give 5,000 roughly people a first dose as quickly as possible, and hopefully the coming week or two, and then in a subsequent shipment you would give those people their second dose. So it would not be a plan to hold half at this time.
All right, committee, any more questions for Rennie? All right, Governor, I appreciate again your opportunity and come and have this conversation with the Joint Appropriations Committee. I guess with that, we'll turn it over to your staff. We have Chief of Staff Buck McVeigh, and I think you've got other members of your staff with you. So with that, I think we'll dive off in here. But thank you, Governor. God bless you and your family. Again, thanks again.
Thank you,
All right.
members of the committee, Mr. Co-Chair.
All right, I'm looking on my screen for, oh, there you are, Buck.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Buck McVeigh. I'm Chief of Staff for Governor Gordon. With me today, I have Policy Advisor Erica Ladursky, who will assist me. We also, again, have Director of Policy, Rennie McKay, that will be on the phone as well. Today, I will walk you through our supplemental budget, as well as our proposed budget reductions. And Mr. Chairman, before I start, I would really like to offer a big thanks to, first of all, our budget director, Kevin Hibbert and his staff at the budget department, to Erica, Rennie, and all of my policy staff. You know, they've just done a tremendous amount of work on this budget and going through the reduction process, and I just want to give them a public nod, if you will. As you all know, this administration started with a pared down budget from the previous administration. So we're accustomed to doing more with less, which really matches up with Governor Gordon's philosophy of smaller government. And one other thing I want to ask, I beg your indulgence, since there are two of us in the room, we're wearing our masks. And so if you have a tough time understanding me, please let me know. The cuts we have implemented this year and our proposed cuts are significant, and none were done lightly. Nor should there be the perception that these cuts aren't going to impair our ability to take on as much as past governors' offices. Just to let you know, we started with fewer staff than the previous administration. And you will see in this presentation now that we've already eliminated, or we will be eliminating another position on the policy staff. We are also reducing the amount of contract services we can use. More of our staff are having to do more, spreads us thinner, but obviously these are the realities of the environment we're living in right now, and those of a budget crisis. Mr. Chairman, specifically as other agencies did in this exercise, our office implemented the budget reductions in 3 steps. Step 1 was a freeze on contracts and hiring. And that was done I believe it was in April. Step 2 was a cut of up to 10%. This office, in step 2, we cut a total of 9.9%, which we will go through in this presentation. These reductions have already been implemented. The step 2 have through the B11 process. And then there's step 3, which step 3 reductions, which are included in the supplemental budget books and will be implemented July 1st of 2021, if approved. For our office, for the governor's office, the step 3 proposals amounted to 10.1%. Now, Mr. Chairman, I don't know how we want to proceed, but if you would like to start with questions now, that would be fine. Otherwise, I will go page by page or by unit number order and discuss step 2 and step 3 reductions and our 1 supplemental budget request as they appear in order in our supplemental budget book. So I'll keep your wishes here.
So Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and Mr. McVeigh, thank you as well, and Eric, I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. So my question kind of revolves around big picture on all of the budgets, and it's kind of what I've seen over my time here on appropriations, and that is it's and I kind of get it. It's always light on cutting in the 100 series, and heavier when you get down to grants and or in 900 series that goes out to folks. So, you know, if you, and I know maybe this was a question for the governor, but it's really kind of goes back to the budget folks. Really, what was your philosophy on the 100 series versus other series, or was it just, hey, agencies, this is really hard, get what you can get where you can get it, because it's just not easy to cut this much. So did you have some overall themes when you talk to agencies about how and where reductions should be made? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, that's a very good question. And obviously when we go to making any type of budget reductions, for many agencies, they don't have a lot of budget substance outside of their 100 series. So it makes it real difficult for these folks. We started out requesting agencies to do programmatic cuts. So when they were looking at their 10%, was that going to be, we didn't want it to be across the board cuts. Obviously, that made it very problematic for some agencies, again, that were heavy in the 100 series and lighter in other areas that they could cut, and for that matter, for just the program depth that they had in their particular agencies. So really a philosophy was probably to look at positions that were not currently filled first, and then obviously do the heavy lifting after that if it entailed cutting positions to get to their desired mark. So that's kind of where we were.
Committee, any questions? All right. What I'd like to do, Buck, rather than just walk line item by line item through your budget, try to save some time, would be, rather than do that, would just open it up to the committee and go through the budget. I think most of us are familiar enough with the budget, but I think that will expedite the process and get to the real issues that we want to have a discussion with. So with that committee, specific to the governor's office, any questions to the step 2, step 3 governor's changes to the budget? I'm going to start well, go ahead, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And you are the chairman, but just a note to you, I really like to go through the budgets page by page. And I can't, if you start to ask a question on page 12 and then I jump back to page 3, it just becomes more confusing to my old mind. So and it's not so important in this budget perhaps, but I would like you to consider that as we move forward. Thank you.
Any other thoughts on that committee?
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Yeah, I would concur with that, Mr. Co-Chair. I think with this particular budget, I only have questions on page 13 and maybe 41 and 48. But as we get into the other agencies, I think it's useful for them to walk through each, at a minimum, each entity that has a reduction and just kind of refer to it to refresh us as we go, and also to educate those who are on board. And before we go on, and for all of the agencies, and I meant to mention this, this came up last night while we were kind of preparing for this, and after reviewing just what we've done on Zoom meetings for the last couple of months. So, and Buck, you get to be picked on because you're the first agency up. But what we would like other agencies to do, as much as possible, and Don, if we can send out an email to all of the agency heads regarding this, when the agencies testify in front of us, if they can have more than one computer so that the person that's talking can actually have a computer in front of them so we can see their face, similar to you're seeing our face, because what we see, because you have, Buck, you have the window behind you, so you just gotta kind of have a halo around your head, and we just see a shiny top of your head, and that's about it. And so it would be very helpful, and it's just a lot easier for us to ask the questions and to kind of hear the responses if the agency folks can have could kind of be on a screen face to face with us. It will make this process a lot, I think, more enjoyable for us and easier for us to understand. And also, and then as we walk through the budgets, please have kind of a page turning reference to us so we can go page by page with you as we walk through the different units. And each agency is a bit different. But if you can go, for example, to Unit 101, Unit 102 at page 2 on your supplemental budget, then we'll be able to page turn either manually or by computer as we go. And the response can be, there are no changes in this. There are no changes in Unit 1. There are no changes in Unit 2. And so then we can kind of tap through it a little bit quicker. And we'll practice that a little bit with you, Buck. So that's just my kind of 2 cents and my contribution to this general process. Thanks a lot, Mr. Co-Chair.
Senator Kinski, you had a comment.
Well, it's a question, it's a request for Don. This, going through this with every other page being upside down is not going to work for me. And I'm going through the 2021 General Session JAC. I'm trying to find there's a document on there that has all of these into a single document. And I'm wondering if Don or Elizabeth or somebody can point me to that. I'm going to have to download that to follow along. These books are not workable.
All right, committee, any other discussion? Yep. Go back to Senator or Representative Larson. Do you have a question? Nope. Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. And I think the other reason it's important to go page by page is we have a lot of people that are listening in on this. And so why we all read these budget books page by page over and over, the public doesn't. So I think it's important as we roll through this that agencies tell us what they've done and the import of the impact on the people of what they've done. So we have a clear understanding. And so I just wanted to kind of clarify one of the reasons. Albeit it's easier for me to go page by page, but I think there's a value to the broader public if we do so. Thank you, Mr.
All right, committee, I guess we're going to walk page by page through here. If there's no other questions, I'm going to turn it back to you, Buck, to go ahead and start us through the governor's budget on his agency.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And so I would ask, I'll start out by asking you to turn to, we'll start on page 4 with the, this is the summary table for the Office of the Governor. And this does include our office and the Office of Homeland Security, which is also under the Governor's office. So really what I wanted to point out on table 4, really down by the bottom where it says total by funds for the budget fiscal year 2021, the first column, you'll see down there that the governor's budget for this biennium was $35,985,659. The next column over, column 3, shows what the department's step 2 COVID reductions amounted to. And again, this includes the Office of Homeland Security, but those totaled $850,800. You go to column 4, these would be the proposed department step 3 COVID-19 reductions of $1,146,194. And then the next column over, column 5, is the represents the supplemental request, and our office is recommending one supplemental request item, which we will go over here as we proceed. But that is for the amount of $2,500,000. So column 6, this is the governor, really the net total, the net of all the changes that we've been talking about from where we started with the reductions and with the supplemental request. This turns out to be a net increase of $435,595,000 in our budget, bringing the total in the column 7, the total of the governor's recommended appropriation to $36,944,262. Now, right below that total by funds, you'll see the total authorized employees. And again, we started off with the budget fiscal year with a total of 45 employees. The step 2 reductions in the next column, we did reduce one position, and that was a policy advisor position that we cut, bringing that down to a total of 44 employees for the governor's recommended appropriation. So unless there's any questions on that summary table, we can go ahead and proceed with the breadth of this of pages 5 through 10 really are just the narratives that you've seen in the
Mr. Vice Chair.
So I have a question from Co-Chairman Nicholas first, and then we'll go to Senator Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. A couple different questions, and partly I'm asking just for clarification for folks that are listening in. Buck, you've got a total step 1 and step 2 reduction of $1.24 million. And what does that represent as a percentage of your general fund dollars? Because even though you have a $36.9 million budget, 20.5 million and another 1 million are other federal funds and other funds. So what we're really talking about on these reductions are general fund dollars. And so what does that 1.14 represent in terms of general fund expenditures reductions?
Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman Nicholas, the 1.14 represents step 3 reductions, and that total percentage amounts to 10.14%, 8.3% of which is ongoing, and 1.8% is one time.
And so the governor has asked for a 10% and a 5% roughly on the step 1, step 2. And I'm just curious how much will it hurt if we add another, if we make that your 10% into a 15%?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, actually our step 2 cut represented 9.9%. And so the total of the two, step 2 and the proposed step 3, we're right at 19.99%.
Yeah, that's better. That's what I thought. Okay, thanks.
Senator Drew.
Oh, that was my question. We got it. Thanks.
All right.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, one other question.
Go ahead.
On your exception request that you have listed on this page, and that comes up next anyway, of the 2.5 million having to do with the emergency dollars. Can you tell us what has been, how you came up with that figure? What was expended in the fires so far out of this current biennium?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, if we're talking about the, I guess for clarification, are you talking about the supplemental request? Or are you talking about the?
That's correct. Yes, on page 11.
Okay. Okay, that supplemental request is actually for litigation to the Supreme Court on that, and not as a cut to or in addition to for fires. Is that what you were saying, Mr. Chairman?
No, yeah, I mischaracterized it. I'm just curious what the litigation and outreach coordination dollars are for and how you came up with that figure.
I think this, let's see, I'm going to talk about this later on. Let me hold on just 1 minute. Okay. Mr. Chairman and Chairman Nicholas, that the 2.5 million request for the litigation and outreach coordination, this relates to cooperation with the state of Montana related to the Supreme Court litigation for the Wyoming, Montana versus the state of Washington case. And this was a Commerce Clause argument. And I think what this represents, Mr. Co-Chair, is really the highest possible cost that we could determine. So not knowing what it's really going to entail, we're shooting to basically, due to the importance of this case, we shot for the what we thought was the highest possible cost for this endeavor.
Mr. Co-Chair, follow-up.
Go ahead.
So, Buck, what's the status? Where is this litigation at? Is it in the brief writing? Is it in the arguments? What's the timing of it? And what participation is the AG performing versus a consultant? And what does a consultant cost today? I guess what I'd like to do is get all that information submitted to LSO, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But I think we're going to need that in order to address this request.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that question, Co-Chairman Nicholas. I don't know if Director McKay has any insight on where we stand currently with this litigation. Do you have? Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. The U.S. Supreme Court allowed the case to move ahead to a discussion with the special counsel. And that is when the state of Montana and our Attorney General's office looked to employ a contractor. So we will provide that information to you. So the 2.5 million is the total cost at the high end of the entire suit. But the goal is to have that split between the state of Wyoming and the state of Montana. But they have a new Attorney General, so we cannot confirm that today that Montana will remain in that, because we have to wait until the new Attorney General takes office in Montana. But all signs are positive, and that we should be able to move ahead as a partnership. So that immediately the goal would be that cost comes down to half. But we are working with attorneys who have a consultant who has special expertise in this matter of dealing with the special counsel federally. And so if the special counsel gives positive direction to the Supreme Court, then the case would move ahead to the full Supreme Court. And that would potentially entail the entire 2.5 million, ideally again split between Wyoming and Montana. But if Montana's Attorney General, when he takes office, decides not to join, obviously that could change, and we would have to cover the entire cost if we want to move ahead.
All right, I see Governor Gordon back on there. Governor, anything you want to add to that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman. I think Director McKay briefed you as good as I would. I will tell you that I have been in conversations with Governor-elect Gianforte, and all signs seem to point to continued cooperation on that suit.
All right. Committee, any other issues on that? Representative Swartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious, did we look into the possibility that the AG's office with their staffing could manage some of this?
Rennie, you want to answer that question?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we did look into that, and at this time with other challenges and in terms of expertise, the Attorney General's office did agree with the state of Montana that our most effective course would be to hire outside counsel on this, and so it is with the Solicitor General right now is where this case is sitting, but the U.S. Supreme Court did allow it to move to that consideration.
All right, any more questions on this issue? If not, I'm going to move on the governor's budget. Buck, back to you, or committee, any more questions on this? Buck, I've got one question, and I noticed on the budget, when we go back to page 4, on the baseline scientific assessments, that's a relatively new item within the governor's budget. That was something that was brought on under Governor Meade. I think it's only been around for about 8 years. But I'm curious, out of that $307,000, why there was no reductions in that particular area, and what are we currently planning on using that baseline scientific assessment funding for?
Mr. Chairman, if you give me one second on this thing. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can you tell me which page you're on?
Page 4.
Mr. Chairman, so this contract, okay, for the full count, okay, the new contract of $307 is for work performed on the sage grouse application. This is the GIS program that does crucial geospatial analysis. So it's pretty much priced out at what it actually is going to cost to do the sage grouse analysis. So that's why we didn't. We looked at it, but we didn't see any room in there to cut without it harming the program in total.
All right, committee, any more question on the governor's office of the governor's budget? Go ahead, Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that, I believe that brings us to page 12. And this is the table that shows the step 2 COVID reduction priorities. And we have 4 budget priority reductions. Unit 101 was the position elimination that I just referred to, that talks about, or that actually eliminates one of the policy advisor positions in the office. Page 2 is the FNRPA reduction, recommending a reduction of $250,000. And I'll point out that after these step 2 reductions, that leaves us, would leave us with a spending authority of $750,000. And we do propose reducing the amount of, we do have a current cash balance in the FNRPA account, approximately $4.1 million. And at this, we feel like we can sustain this particular cut at $250,000 with given the current corpus, and be able to carry forth with the FNRPA. I will discuss this a little bit later down the road if it is okay with you folks. Priority 3, Unit 101 is the travel reduction of $10,000, and Priority 4, Unit 101 is contract services reduction. And that the total of our step 2 budget reduction priorities, then 519,547. All right. So right now, if we go to page 13. All right. Okay, that's Homeland Security. We will discuss that. Director Budd will discuss that later. Page 14, Mr. Chairman, covers our Step 3 COVID-19 reduction priorities. There are 8 of them, amounting to $1,081,200. And again, as I said to Chairman Nicholas a little bit ago, that represents the 10.14% reduction in our budget. With the exceptions of both the step 2 and the step 3, that's going to result in a total of almost 20% for the Office of the Governor. It's actually 19.99%, 18 of which is on go. So unless there's questions there, we can go to page 17.
Buck, I got a question.
Excuse me.
Yeah, go Co-Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you. So, Buck, you mentioned a little earlier that the size of this office is reduced compared to the prior governor's office. Could you just kind of give us the what was before and what's now? And what's the total budget differences?
Well, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chair, I can't speak to the exact budget difference. Maybe Erica can do that for us. But we did come in position-wise substantially lower. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the previous administration had 4 additional policy advisors than what we came in at, and substantially more administrative assistance as well. So what we've done as coming in to this administration was effectively adding more to the plate of each policy advisor so that they had to kind of manage multiple areas, whereas I think in previous administrations they were a little bit more specialized in maybe 1 or 2 areas.
Sure, Mr. Co-Chair, and Buck, if you could just give us total budget comparisons and total employee comparisons, that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair, and I think Erica is working on that.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to do it right now. Just
okay.
Yeah, great.
So,
thank you,
Buck. I've got a question on page 14 where you see a reduction in your priority number 6, and then it's got a footnote down there. This is the Intergovernmental Cooperation 200 series, reduction of 106. Could you just explain what that is and what statutory change that's going to require? Just trying to find section D in this budget's about impossible with these books. So.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, there's a good question on this, and incidentally, any of these we will cover every single one of them as we go along. But this on this particular one, Mr. Chairman, the governor's office is proposing a reduction in the intergovernmental cooperation of 106,200, and this is the exact biennial cost for what is known as the Education Commission of the States.
Okay.
Okay.
That's
oh, excuse me?
That's what I wanted to find out. That's what I thought it was, but I can't track it in this budget. So that's good, Buck. Senator Guru, you had a question.
Yeah, just to follow up on yours, so that you're asking for a statutory change, but there's not one in the hopper right now, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, if you were to accept that proposal, it would require a statutory change. Okay.
Mr. Co-Chair, are you asking for a one-time change to the statute, or you want this permanent?
Mr. Chairman, this would be a permanent move.
Any other questions? Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman and Buck, before you go to page 17, I want to go back up to your division summary table on page 16. And it's kind of a comment on the lines of what Chairman Nicholas said. But if you look at your general fund reduction in your admin group, it's really only 7%. And so when I look at FNRPA dollars being cut and your admin being held more or being not taking the same degree of cut, and I will have this concern with every agency that comes down the track, is we have a tendency to want to cut grants out to communities and people and not cut our own admin. So speak to me why you didn't cut your admin more in this division table. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, it's a good question. Again, we put a lot of scrutiny into these cuts, and I wanted to let you know that our admin staff here at the governor's office is already highly understaffed. We didn't feel we had any area that we could cut administrative staff and functionality without severely hampering our efforts here in the governor's office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Did that answer your question, Representative?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I think it'll go back to what Chairman Nicholas was looking for, is really how much did you reduce in the last little bit, and then whether you really continued those reductions appropriately or whether we need to refigure that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Buck.
All righty. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So I believe we were at, if you go to page 17, this is step 2, reduction priority 1. And again, that's the elimination of the policy advisor position for $189,547. And again, I've covered what what the constraint will be on that particular move, but we feel like we can probably step up to that challenge. Step 2, reduction priority number 3 is the reduction in in-state and out-of-state travel. We're proposing a reduction of $10,000. And I think now what we've learned through this COVID crisis, if you will, is we'll look for more opportunities to attend meetings virtually, and thus allowing us to decrease the number of face-to-face meetings that we will be attending. We'll have staff attend fewer events and reserve our travel budget for in-state meetings with constituents and stakeholders. The next item, reduction priority number 4 on page 18. And that is contract services reduction Governor's office is proposing to reduce its contract services by $70,000. Of course, obviously, this will result in fewer contract opportunities. But to give you an idea, what we use the contracts primarily for is for temporary services and office support. Again, we rely on usually having to staff up for things like legislature and for any special projects that come on where we feel like we need some assistance. This will obviously have an impact on our efficiencies and really our public service capabilities, especially during the legislative session or a normal legislative session. Let's put it that way. So the next item on page 18, section 6 is actually a step 3 reduction priority number 8. And this again is a contract services reduction. Similar kind of impacts for what I just talked about with reduction in contracts. But this particular reduction amounts to $100,000. And just to kind of expand, I mentioned that we use contractor temp services a lot of times for assistance on planning efforts, and one of which was like efforts for water strategy. So where we don't have the manpower to do it, that's what our contracts typically are used for. Now, if we could go to page 21.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Buck, this is Representative Summers. If you could go back to page 20, your summary table. I have a question on it. And I question page 20.
Okay.
Page 20 on your summary table. Did you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
And so my question is when you look at your 200 series, you got a budget of over 500,000 and you cut only 10,000 out of your 200 series. And so, you know, the question I always ask, and you can provide me the information later if you'd like, but really, are you expending all of that 500,000 in that 200 series? And why did you cut so little? And I know 200 series have always held a little bit of table cash, let's say, for agencies. But as I look at these budgets in places to cut further if we need to, you know, I look at this and the big red flag goes off to me that says, cut me, cut me. So I'm just wondering, what have you been expending, and has it been this amount of money? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, again, this will be an item, if you will, we'll get back to you on that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Buck. Oh, we got a question from Representative Stith, and then we'll go to Representative Schwartz.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Buck, using page 20 as an example, I think I understand what's going on, but could you describe how column 4 and column 6 work together? So with respect to, for example, contractual services, there's a reduction of 100,000, but then in column 6, there's an add back of 50,000. Do you mind just explaining? I think I know what you're doing there, but could you explain so I'm not confused?
Buck, I'll turn that over to Kevin. I see him raising his hand. I think he can answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, I can answer that question. In step 2, we acted upon those to the B11 with the exception of the fact that some of them required some statutory changes, but largely step 2 were acted upon. Step 3, the governor as in the column of 4, you'll see the $100,000 cut. That's the intent of the cut once it becomes 23, 24, the next biennium. In order for us to implement that, the governor's recommending that we give 1/2 of that $100,000 back so that we can implement that for the remainder of this biennium. That is very important for a lot of reasons, particularly in step 3, we have more statutory changes required and plus timing of the implementation. But that's what that is, the timing of the implementation of step 3 for this remainder of this biennium. But please understand that will be biennialized or doubled back or to the original amount in column 4 when we get to 23-24. We worked very diligently trying to make this as clear as we could in IBARs, and I think we were successful in doing so about the implementation of step 3.
So Representative Smith, that answer your question?
That does. Thank you so much.
All right, Representative Swartz, you had a question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is following up on Representative Summers on the 200 series. And the numbers that caught my attention were the travel in state and out of state. And I don't need an answer now, but given that COVID has really reduced the number of face-to-face meetings, I'd like some information about how the governor's office is managing the travel in light of that.
You got that, Kevin? Or not Kevin, Buck? We can get that information.
Mr. Chairman, we certainly will. And I don't know, yes, we will certainly get all this information back to you folks.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Kevin, go ahead.
When I give the budget presentation for the state budget department, I'll be talking about the Chapter 17 report and the want and need for us to upgrade them, how that works. And I think that's going to be very responsive to Representative Summers and recently Representative Swartz's request is that we want to develop Chapter 17 to be more reflective of the real biennium amount that was budgeted and the actual amount that was expended in that budget amount. Currently, the Chapter 17 reflects a different budget period against a different expenditure cycle. If we get those timed correctly, you'll be able to see in the Chapter 17 report exactly how much agencies are either spending or not spending. And another challenge would be on top of that as to how to implement any B11s that came in through the process since the appropriations so that we can show you the dynamic of how that relates inside of the Chapter 17. So you can see, we can see, here's the 200 series, here's how much was budgeted, and here's how much was expended, apples to apples, because today it's apples and more like begins. I mean, it's really tough to make a comparison to the Chapter 17.
Okay, Kevin, so when would we expect to see this new modified Chapter 17? You got a time frame for us?
Mr. Chairman, I really wanted to do that this summer. That was our mission. And if you look at the reorganization of the state budget department, that's one of my highest priorities. But naturally, we have just been inundated by the necessity of getting the COVID response, step 1, step 2, and step 3 done, and also very highly motivated to hand off a document to LSO that isn't confusing, because we all know when we get confused, it just takes more time out of everybody's pockets. So being said, we've recognized the importance of this for many years. However, this summer we didn't have the time to do it. I would like to get this done and in place for the next Chapter 17 report that the Joint Appropriations Committee gets next October, so that you'll be able to see those comparisons and they'll just, that dynamic about what you've been looking for in the comparison to the 200 series, or it doesn't really matter what series it is, it just leaps out on the page to you to say, okay, agency, you're not spending this money. It's right there.
Okay, Representative Swartz, that answer your question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was the question I had.
All right. Committee, any other questions on this? If not, Buck, we'll have you proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that puts us to page 21, where, and this is under the Section 6, Step 3 budget reductions. This is priority number 2, international trade reductions. And Mr. Chairman, we're looking at a reduction here of $125,000 in our international trade in marketing. This general fund appropriation allows Wyoming really to identify impediments in our and act on opportunities to improve Wyoming's access in the international markets. and export growth. Expenditures include not only international trade, but they improve the state's relative strength in the global marketplace and expand our access to markets and advanced trade representation for Wyoming commodities and products. This proposal cut will reduce the trade program by 50%, but still allows for some development of international markets in later 2021. So we felt in scrutinizing this program that considering the current environment due to COVID-19, honestly, there will not be any trips out of the country this year, which means we won't be able to do an advanced trip to better establish our relationships in Asia. This cut, so we'll, as far as the impact, this will or could reduce future foreign trade. And if there's no questions here, Mr. Chairman, I would ask you to turn to page 23, if you will. We covered this briefly a little bit ago, but this is a budget reduction priority number 6, intergovernmental cooperation. As we talked about earlier, this is the exact biennial cost for the Education Commission of the states. And this is this basically costs $53,100 per year. And Mr. Chairman, what the Education Commission of the states provides is assistance and information from other states on issues such as school finance, school improvement, and policy. It's important information for sure. The commission is composed of a delegation of 7 people from each state that participate in the Interstate Compact for Education. So our particular delegation includes our education policy advisor from the governor's office, a state senator, a state representative, and 4 others appointed by Governor Gordon. And as far as the impacts of us not participating in this or by cutting it out, means we would not have access to the commission's information, if you will, and the expertise, which could obviously potentially weaken the state's ability to develop our education policies. And to Senator Garew's question regarding this action, this would require a statutory change to 21-16-301 through 21-16-302 if it's approved. And while we're talking on Unit 104, intergovernment cooperation, this appropriation also pays for our participation in the Western Governors and National Governors Association. And, you know, really, when we look at the overall benefit of these intergovernmental agencies that we contract with, we feel like the benefit of NGA and WGA really are most important. WGA provides this collaboration that we have with other Western states and ensures a pretty strong Western voice in Washington, D.C. The states receive several grants from the NGA, bringing us a larger return on investment that we pay per year. And just to give you an idea, for the NGA, we were awarded a grant of $100,000 for the Educate for Opportunity grant process. So again, the return on our investment there is proven to be pretty significant. Wyoming's also been selected to participate in the NGA Learning Collaborative on state strategies and leverage data to address impaired driving. So again, in weighing the education compact versus the NGA, WGA, we felt in scrutinizing this area that the NGA and the WGA kind of offered us a little bit more.
Mr. Co-Chair,
Go ahead.
I've sent a note to Don to draft the bill necessary to follow through with the governor's request.
All right, and Representative Larson, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. But could you just help me as get my memory, what part of education this Education Commission of States impacts? Is that K-12 or is that our association with WICHE? Just clarify what part of education that, or is it all inclusive?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I can't really address that. It's a very good question. We'll write it down and get back to you on that, if that's acceptable.
Mr. Vice Chairman, follow up if you would. It sticks in my mind that there's one of those commissions that we're involved with that helps us with our involvement with WICHE and in allowing that interaction with other states to help provide higher education for our kids. But I just couldn't remember if this was it or not.
All right, if no more questions on that, go ahead, Buck, and next page.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. We'll talk a little bit about, if you'll turn to page 26. And again, this is the hospital cost study. And this study was completed in 2019. And really $20,000 remained in that program after the study was done. So the reduction will really have no impact on the study that was completed, and we will be reverting that money of $20,000.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Buck and maybe Dawn or whoever can answer this for me. So how does this differ from a reversion? Are you just trying to pick up the reversion quicker? It didn't revert the last time. I'm trying to understand why this is hanging there and wasn't in the reversion section. And Dawn or whoever can answer that can help me out.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I believe this money has reverted. This occurs a couple of times in the governor's supplemental budget request. And you can see on the table on page 27, there is no money associated with this other than they put in $1 in and out just to note it. So it's basically highlighting a reduction that is already incorporated in the reversion amounts.
Thank you.
All right, go ahead, Buck. No, Representative Larson, you had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. And Don, can you remind me, wasn't that the original amount, the 20,000, or was it 40? And then the Department of Health done most of that in-house? Could you just remind me?
Mr. Chairman, I'll have to defer. I don't know the original amount, but I can look it up.
Mr. Chairman, the amount of the study, if it sticks in my mind, was somewhere around, I thought 200 and the appropriation was like for 250,000, and I think that the cost came in at about 230.
All right, Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Buck, if we go back to the previous reduction on page, find it here. I'm trying to do this on my computer since you guys pulled a fast one and sent us budget books that you have to rotate all the time. So I have to find this on my computer. On page 23, when we talk about the intergovernmental cooperation, and not concerned about it, but that requires that statutory change. And in how many instances do you have budget reductions that require statutory changes? Or really, it's really what is the dollar value of that? And if those statutory changes were not to pass, what is the governor's approach to creating a balanced budget? And I say that as a devil's advocate question, because there's just a few of us that are a member of this committee. We have to take it to the entire body to get those passed. And so trying to think, if they were not to pass, how do we get those reductions in place?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, if I could possibly call on Kevin, Director Hibbert. I don't know if he's still with us on the call.
Yes, so Mr. Chairman, I think LSO has put a pretty good document together, and I think we led the information on that through the IBAR system. So what we've done is, first of all, in the exception priority table, whether it was step 2 or step 3, we put an asterisk on those items that needed to have a statutory change for implementation. And then between step 2 and step 3, we put in a new section D. Section D would be in the IBARs for what statutory changes need to be accomplished for implementation. We did that so that we could be as transparent as possible. If you look off the LSO document here that they put together, I think there's like $14.2 million of statutory changes that are required for implementation. I think it's important that we continue to go through all these implementation of all these reductions. But when you get into 23, 24, we're a little bit better off than that, but we're on the bubble as far as the implementation of that in the current biennium, with how much that we actually had in the general fund on the profile. I think it was like 13 million, and now this is 14 million. So we're going to need some statutory changes to implement and to be able to make this budget successful. And I don't think that should be a surprise to anybody. We've talked about that several times. And I do believe that one of the most important things were the implementation process and the development of IBARs to make this transparent for the legislature to see what those statutory changes are. And we also recognized when we went from step 2 to step 3 and then implementation of step 3, how complicated it was going to be with those statutory changes and the possible challenges that the legislature is going to face with implementing a statutory change as well. So that's one of the reasons why we've backed off step 3, because there's more statutory changes in there to give us the time that we need to get the legislation that's necessary for those implementations. And maybe some of that legislation failed, and we may have to look at other reductions to compensate for those. But basically, I think that should get you 80% of the way there on what we're trying to accomplish with statutory reductions.
Thank you.
All right, committee, Buck, back to you to kind of start wrapping her up. I think we're on page 29, Buck.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I was on mute. I just wanted to say for clarification, the hospital study appropriation was for 200,000, and the actual cost of the study came in at 180. So just for that clarification. Okay, did you say, Mr. Chairman, we are on page 29, the emergency contingency?
Yeah, Buck. We'll take off from there.
All right, this is a proposed, this is a budget reduction priority number 7, emergency response. And Mr. Chairman, we're proposing a reduction of $525,000 in the special contingency account, which will leave only $475,000 left in the account. This will take the account actually down to close to where it was in the previous biennium of close to $443,000. And by doing this reduction, it will limit our ability for the state to pay for any unforeseen emergency costs related to things like floods and tornadoes. And one of the things I wanted to point out too, with the amount of fire activity that we saw over the summer, we anticipate there's going to be a heightened potential for flooding this spring and summer. So just to point that out.
Buck, along those lines, because it's fire related, was there any discussion in the office? Because I think we still have sufficient, there is funding in the emergency fire suppression account. Was there any discussion of utilizing or expanding the use of those for the secondary effects of fires?
Mr. Chairman, I am not aware of a discussion of that nature. I don't know if Director McKay, with your natural resource policy person, if you've had that discussion with any of the agencies involved.
Mr. Chairman, I have to get back to you for more details on that. That's not something I have available right now.
Okay.
Well, Rennie, on those lines, I would look at the statutory provisions under the emergency fire suppression account and see if that's something that you'd like to look at. I think that might take a statutory change. I'm sure my friend with the state forester probably doesn't like that idea, but even the feds come back through their program. They call it BEAR, which is an acronym. Oh, I see Director Budd raising her hand. Maybe she's got an answer to the question as far as using the ESA count for the secondary effects. So we'll throw it over to you, Lynn. What's the answer?
Well, I have a partial answer, Mr. Chairman. The fire costs can be funded through an FMAG, or a Fire Management Assistance Grant from FEMA. We did receive 2 of those declarations this past summer. That results in some additional mitigation money being available to spend in that particular area that's affected by the fires. And so there is some additional funding related to fires that can be used to mitigate some of those consequences in the springtime. And there are efforts ongoing right now to get some of that work done.
Yeah, and those are only for FEMA designated fires, but certainly doesn't.
Absolutely, yes, sir, you're right.
And Lynn, correct me, but I think it takes over 200 structures or homes to be qualified for a FEMA fire. So it may be something we want to look at above and beyond FEMA for the emergency fire suppression account for secondary impacts. But anyway, just a suggestion. All right, with that, Buck, we're going to turn it back to you. Anything else that you have on that?
Mr. Chairman, if we could go to page 32, we have a step 3 budget reduction. Priority number 3, the Wyoming Coal Marketing Program. We're looking at a reduction of $50,000, which amounts to a 5% reduction. That will decrease the amount of money that can be spent to protect and expand Wyoming coal markets and coal facilities to address impacts to cities, towns, and counties that they've experienced or will experience due to the change in the coal market. This obviously means, excuse me?
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Buck, when you talk about this particular section, this 1 million, how much has been expended? What do you expect to expend? In other words, I know you cut 50,000 out, but do you actually have programs rolling out to spend this money? Or is this in case of, just kind of give me a rundown there, please.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, yes, 500,000 has been allocated thus far by way of the Wyoming Energy Authority for a contract that we have with the Energy Policy Network. The purpose of the EPN, Energy Policy Network, is to analyze future market for Powder River coal. And they assess projects where support efforts can be put forth to extend the life of a coal plant. They do a wealth of work for us and for the state, engaging in things like state regulatory proceedings associated with the future life of the power plant, economic and environmental research on coal-based power plants, and just a wealth of service and information. So total contracts that we have is for $500,000, half of which is payable each year to the current budget cycle, through the Wyoming Energy Authority.
So just to follow up, Mr. Chairman, is that the $500,000 contract, Mr. Chairman, is that already expended, and is it a biennial product? In other words, do you still have $500,000 in that pot? And then that would go to my original question. How do you plan to expend that 500,000 or now 450 if you take 50 out?
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that we are still have that to spend.
So Buck, a follow-up on that. So what's the duration of the contract? Is it a 2 or 3 or 4-year contract with the Energy Policy Network? So how long is that $500,000? Are they under contract to provide those services?
Mr. Chairman, I would ask my policy director, Rennie, if you know the answer to that question.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Rennie.
It's a 2-year contract for the life of this biennium.
All right, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't discuss my concerns about the Energy Policy Network, but in the description of impacts, you refer to impacts to cities and towns and counties. Has any money been expended in that respect to help local areas that have had the layoffs and the bankruptcies out of this funding?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
This is something we're looking at. We did expend money in the previous biennium through some governor's contingency funds to Lincoln County as they were doing some planning. So we're really trying to work with local communities if they're expressing interest in starting a process, and Lincoln County invested its own dollars to do that. And so that is the purpose of that remaining dollars, is we could engage in that work with communities if they want to start that work. So Lincoln County is a good example. They've got a plan that's out there. They've hired staff even that is helping them look at their economic future.
Thank you for that. And I guess, Mr. Chairman, if I may, as we go forward, if that's occurring, it would be helpful to know about it.
All right, committee. Next item we had on there, I think we've already covered it. Is there anybody who wants to go over the 2.5 million for the litigation? Other than Representative Schwartz? Oh.
Mr. Chairman, I will let my facial expression suffice.
And you were doing a very good job at that, Representative Schwartz. So. All right. With that, Buck, I think are we wrapped up with the governor's office then?
We are very, Mr. Chairman, we are very close because pages 36 to 48 are for Homeland Security. Director Budd and Deputy Director Christensen will go over those. Really, we're down to just going back really to discussion here about the natural resource policy account. This would be page 51. the FNRPA reduction here. So just cover that very quickly. Governor's office, this again is a step 2 reduction that I think we've talked about it a little bit, so we can really move on from here unless there's any questions from the
committee. Any questions, Representative Schwartz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's just a clarification. Buck, I thought I heard you say the balance in the account was 4.1 million, but in the narrative here, it references 2.9, and I just at some point want to make sure we know what that balance is. Thanks.
Yeah, Buck, and along those lines on that 4.1, I'm assuming some of those are obligated and haven't been paid out yet. Is that the difference on that? Or Rennie, you may know, one of you.
Mr. Chairman, there are some encumbered dollars for that account. Part of the challenge in administering it is tracking that, because some of them are encumbered but haven't been spent down. So we've got some outstanding bills that are quite old. So there's not a precise number exactly that it fluctuates as we work with locals to understand better if they needed the full amount that was allocated to them. So 4.1 is the total, though.
All right. Any more questions on the governor's office budget? All right, Buck. Well, I'm going to wrap that up then. We're scheduled for a 15-minute break. We're right on schedule, amazingly, for the Appropriations Committee. With that, we're going to recess for 15 minutes and reconvene at, actually, we're going to reconvene at 11 o'clock. We are just a little bit behind schedule.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity, and we will follow up with those questions to the committee members. So thanks again.
And we'll start with you, Director Budd, as soon as we get back. All right, I think we're ready to roll. Committee, I'm gonna do something just a little bit different. Sitting here trying to keep track of everybody that wants to ask a question and flipping my budget book around and around and around and around. If you've got a question, just say something to be recognized rather than raise your hand. I think it'll speed up the process a little bit. It's hard for me to keep track of everybody at the same time of trying to manage the budget book. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Director Budd, if you want to start walking us through your agency budget. I believe we're starting on page 36, if I'm correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's correct. That's correct. We'll try and get you caught up here. We'll move quickly and then hopefully answer any questions you might have, but it should be pretty straightforward. We have been, just as a general overview, as we've moved through the time that Deputy Director Christensen and I have been together in our positions, we have worked hard to look at any open vacancy in our office and make sure to evaluate those positions for the appropriateness of the functions and looking at ways that we can create efficiencies in our agency all along, despite prior to budget cuts. So as we've moved along, on page 37, our first listed step 2 cut is within—
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Representative.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Director Budd, you know, on page 36, I had a question. And that is just kind of give me a highlight. You know, if you look down on your summary page, you have about, you were budgeted about 2.4 million in general funds, 20.5 in federal funds. And so those $2.4 million in general funds, are they scattered out through all of your series? Or is the 2.4 mostly in your 100 series, or where does your general funds kind of hide in your agency? Particularly when I look at how little you cut your 200 series, I'm wondering if much of your 200 series is federal dollars, or if it's just by division and it depends on the division. So where are your general funds within your sector of the agency?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, yes, our general funds are spread out throughout the agency in general. There is one fund, 1110, that I will be talking about that is our only complete unit of general funds. Otherwise, all of the other general funds are utilized to match federal funds. And so that's a 50-50 matching grant. And actually, that was the first one I was going to address is the unit 1101, which again, the majority of our general funds are used to match federal funds. Does that answer your question?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Director Budd, so you scatter your general funds throughout your different series. So you'll have general funds in your 200 series, 100 series. And so as we look at your budgets here, we have no way of knowing what is general funds and what is other funds. Let's just put it that way. That's not unique to your budget. It's just part of the budgetary process.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Kevin.
We actually implemented for the very first time when we interfaced this last budget or the current budget in from IBARs into WOLS. We asked the agencies to delineate those funding streams by object. So we could put a report together for the enterprise that will suggest, because as soon as the biennium opens, everything moves around. B11s are a good example of that, but we could give you the appropriated budget by object, by funding source, by unit, by agency. And then that would help you. But understand it's only at that one point in time. If you recall, in September, I used that report to give you an example of the Department of Health, where they have such a small amount of labor and a massive amount of 600 and 900 series, and they skew the whole enterprise to the ratio of cutting salary dollars versus contract dollars. And I showed you that basically, if you threw the Department of Health out, we were actually cutting more salary dollars than we were other dollars in budgets. But that's where I was able to get that money. Now I'll work on that report and we'll get it to you as quickly as possible. But that would be the only real efficient way about providing an answer for Representative Summers, particularly if that question is going to be asked again.
And just to follow up, Mr. Chairman, I really appreciate that, Kevin, because, and I don't need to know where all the funds, but where are your general funds? So, where are the general funds in those different object codes? Because if we want to make if I don't like a particular cut the governor made, and I want to do a swap, for example, I need to know where I'm going and what I'm doing.
I believe that is reasonable, and we're all in this together. So what we'll try to do as quickly as possible is get you that report all the way down to the unit level by object about how the agency, when it interfaced into wolves, it's that one point in time, and everything else after that just explodes. It changes, B11s, all that. Our reductions of step 2, that changed the whole dynamic too. So I might suggest that we do adjust it for the governor's reductions. I think that'd be important for us to net that off so that we don't cut that twice or expose that twice. We'll work on that as fast as we can. I'll keep you posted on when we can get that delivered to you.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Go ahead, Co-Chair Nicholas.
Kevin, to follow up on that, I'm not sure that may help in some agencies, but in some it won't, because if we can't, it would just be where you made the general fund reductions in, as opposed to the ones or where you did not. And so if it's interspersed throughout an agency's budget, we would only see where you made the changes, right?
Well, I think the plan that I had in my mind was to first of all take the interface and say, this is the budget that we're working with, and we interface it, and here's how each object was funded. And then you take the cuts away from that, whether they happen to be general funds or federal funds, because there's a relationship in there, so that you wouldn't be exposed to cutting them twice. Here's what I can do. We'll get a draft up to Don, have him bounce that off everybody, and we'll try to collaborate to get that answer. But I suspect that this might be a question that's going to be asked repeatedly. And ultimately, we've been studying this whole issue. One of the things we'd like to do is get the Chapter 17 to be reflective of exactly this. And the other thing is that we never knew what this number was until we interfaced in this most recent biennium, or in July. That was the first time that we asked the agencies to actually break out their objects by funding source. So that's the first time we got it. And a combination of those two, and the conversation that we'll have about my budget when we get there, about how we can accomplish this in the financial system, I think would bear fruit for everybody involved, because when we know, we want to be able to look at it and see it. So we'll get on it, see what we can do to develop something that's functional for the Joint Appropriations Committee.
Yeah, we have a lot of things we want to do with your budget, Kevin.
I can imagine.
All right, I see Senator Perkins has joined us. Good to see you, Senator Perkins.
Thank you. It's good to be here. We'll be here as long as I can keep my energy up. So glad to be here. Thank you.
All right. Well, Senator Bebout, he's listening in, so it's nice to have you guys on board. With that, we'll turn it back to you, Lynn, if no more questions, but go ahead and Director Budd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would point out, just for reference, that our original budget, only 10% of our entire budget is general funds. So it is a challenge for us to find money to reduce in the general funds, because the majority of our general funds are used for match. So if I reduce a general fund dollar by $1,000, I lose actually $2,000 in our budget, because we lose that $1,000 in federal funding. So just as a general overview, that's something good to remember with regard to our particular budget. I will then start on page 37. Step 2, priority number 3. We did have now, and this is not a intentional cut, but it is something that will reduce our budget. And that is, we did have a long-term employee retire whose salary is and pay was quite a bit higher due to that longevity. Then we will rehire that position at. So that does reduce our budget. And then priority number 4 at the bottom of the page there is a position that we reduced to part-time. As I said in the beginning, we've been looking very hard at functions within our agency and looking at positions as they become available. And we look at that as an opportunity to try and reorganize and find some more efficiencies within our agency. This particular position was a logistics position, and because of the section chief that we hired in this particular section and her talents, we were able to take a look at this position and believe that we can handle reduction of that position to half-time. Page 38, priority number 5 is reducing another position to part-time. Historically, the state training officer, which is this position, was located at the Wyoming Law Enforcement Academy along with 2 other positions. So this program was run by 3 people at the Law Enforcement Academy. We have brought in that program into our office here. We were funding it with federal dollars and with grant dollars historically. Now, because of the efficiencies being found with the program now and the ability to hire a contractor to do some of that work, we have an ability to reduce this position to half-time as well. Both of these positions were funded with an EMPG grant, which is the 50-50 matching grant. So it will reduce the position funding by 50%, but reduce the general fund money by 25%, if that makes sense. Page 39. This one is a little harder to follow, but it is kind of the same. We have not historically used this type of funding for our salaries, but I know many other states who have. It is a bit risky because we are depending on disaster dollars. This position will handle the hazard mitigation grants. We get hazard mitigation funds after a disaster. And there is a management and administration portion that's 100% federal funding that we can utilize to manage that grant. So this particular position was again funded with EMPG funds, which is a 50-50 federal state. We are going to utilize for half of this position 100% federal funds coming from the hazard mitigation grant management fees. So again, we essentially are reducing the budget for this position in half because it will be covered 100% by federal funds for the second half of that. Let's see. And then I will take you to, if you want to go to page 44.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, Representative Summers.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Director Budd, I won't belabor this, but on page 40, well, I probably will over the course of all the budget hearings. And it goes back to what Kevin's going to get to us. But I wanted to show you an example of what I'm talking about. In your 200 series, you show no cuts on an $808,000 200 series budget. And so, once again, when I see something like that, the red flag goes off in my head. Particularly if your agency or any other agency cut grants to local governments or local people, which your agency has. So as I'm looking at whether if I want to restore those cuts, I might come into your 200 series and slash it in half. So I need to know, that goes back to why you did what you did and what I'm trying to figure out whether that's the appropriate way to cut your agency. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, I've just been informed by my accounting person that we actually use in-kind match for the 200 series. So there's no general funds there. Any other questions on those pages?
Go ahead.
Okay. All right, I will move to let's go to page 42. I'm sorry, I skipped over that earlier.
Wait a sec, Glenn. I do have a question on page 41.
Yes, sir.
When I run across the employee count down there in column 2, it shows you had 17 employees, and then you had 2 reductions of full-time, added 2 part-times, and we ended up with 16 FTEs or authorized employees. I'm just trying to figure out, is because those are part-time, you're attributing that those are only half a position? 17 minus 2 doesn't equal 16. Well, at least it did when I had school math, but can you explain where you come up with those numbers?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, that looks confusing to me as well. We are not removing a position. I would have to take a look at the full-time count. The full-time count for this particular unit should, in my mind, remain at 15, which would then total back up to the 17 in column 7. So we have 15 employees, full-time employees within this unit, and 2 part-time employees within this unit. So maybe Kevin can help me, and maybe it's just the way we're reading it.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Kevin.
we'll get you a definitive answer, but it's rounding in my mind, because if you look at column 4, it's the negative in there, so it doesn't quite get to 1. But I'll get you a clear answer on it.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Lynn. That's page 42.
This is another federal grant that is actually a 25 grant, but we were funding travel for the State Emergency Response Commission. For their meetings, we had $6,665 appropriate or set aside in general funds for travel for the staff and the members of that commission to meet in person. As we've heard before, we've found out we can do meetings by Zoom, and went ahead and got rid of that travel budget out of that account. Okay, then page 44. This is the largest amount of our cuts, and because it is the only unit that we have that is 100% general fund. This fund serves many purposes for our offices, including any expenses that are not allowable under grant funding, such as some travel and other office type expenses that are not allowable under our preparedness grants. It also funds the 8 state regional emergency response teams activations. These teams are activated through our office. They are local teams, but then they become state teams, and we pay for their expenses in response to hazardous materials events and or weapons of mass destruction. We did go ahead in looking at this account. There is an opportunity within the statute for these teams to ask the spiller or the causer of the spill to reimburse them for their expenses. We've not really pushed that really hard historically, and so we did go ahead and send a communication to all of the teams asking them to go ahead and concentrate on trying to get those reimbursements first from the spiller, and then asking us for reimbursement for that activation as a fallback should they not get the reimbursement from the spiller themselves. We also asked them to, or let them know that we would no longer be able to fund activations for planned events. This would be something like the state fair, or high school finals rodeos. Historically, they have been on standby and have been available at those to provide services should they be needed. So we are, thankfully, those teams have looked to actually our Homeland Security grant, which is 100% federal grant, to try and plan ahead for those and put those into their applications for that particular grant, and try to fund those activations with that money. So we did take a significant cut over the two cuts. In fact, it's a 64% cut in this fund. There are things that we're going to have to do that we do have to pay for in our office. And so there is a chance that we will come to a point in time where we cannot do reimbursements for the regional response teams in a certain biennium. So they are aware of that, and that could have a huge impact on local jurisdictions as they do not budget for these activations at the local level. There's an anticipated support from the state level. So we'll hope that we don't get to that point. This is a really hard fund to predict because it's based on the emergencies that happen. Over the last 8-10 years, several bienniums, we did a study and found that the average cost or average utilization of this fund was about $120,000 per year. However, that did include 1 year where the cost was $475,000, as well as, being an average, there were costs that were much less than that. So, we are taking a risk by reducing this fund by as much as we've reduced it. But again, we just don't have that much general fund in our budget. And this was the only unit that we have that was 100% general fund.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just curious, Lynn, is there any local funding that goes into supporting these regional teams?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, the teams are made up of local firemen, so their general responses are, their funding for their program is there. For these particular responses, those are covered by our funds, and the reason being is we actually activate them as a state team, and that's for indemnification and liability. So even if we're not going to pay for, say, a training mission or something, we will go ahead and give them that indemnification and make sure that they're covered by that. We are also investigating, and I did put that in my narrative, at Mr. Hibbard's suggestion. Some of our radiological activities are our radiological response and training are covered by a fee that is charged per cask of radiological materials that travel through our state. We are looking at how we can work with, it's collected by the Department of Transportation, and then those funds are forwarded to our office to support training and other things with regard to radiological readiness and emergency response. That fee, we did look back. That fee was established at $200 a cask back in 1989 when the law was written, and has not seen an increase at all over this period of time. The average fee, and we haven't really completed our study yet and looked at all of the ramifications of how we would do this, but that fee in the states around us and across the nation averages about $950, and some are well over $1,000, even over $2,000. There's also an additional permit fee that's being charged. So I think there's room for us to find some funding that we may be able to switch out some of the training dollars and things like that, and be able to supplement that training and everything, and possibly look at also utilizing some of that funding, depending on how much it ends up being, to support the activations of those teams as well.
A follow-up, Mr. Chairman. I'm just to raise those fees. Is that statutory? Is that by rules?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, that would be statutory.
Thank you.
Okay, I will move on to page 47. This is basically, I want to point it out, but this is the position, the half a position that we're funding with this federal fund. Again, it is dependent upon having disasters and having those management funds to fund that position or fund that half a position. But this is the account where those federal funds will flow through. So there really is no general funds or budget per se attached to that. And I believe that completes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any additional questions.
Many, any questions? Co-chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Director Bud. I understand that you're having personnel issues with your deputy director and that he's kind of causing a ruckus over there. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. It really is a problem. In fact, I think he's going to leave me.
Mr. Christensen, would you like to repeat that? We couldn't hear you. You were on mute.
Thank you for the opportunity, but I recognize your time is incredibly valuable.
Oh, well, thank you. All right, Director, anything else? Committee, anything for Director Bud? All right, I think you're off the hot seat. So the next item we have is governor's residence. Do we have anybody representing the First Lady, or is she available?
Mr. Chairman, I will be presenting the First Lady's budget today.
All right, I'm trying to find you. Is that Erica?
I'm sorry, it is Erica.
You're all the way down in the bottom corner. I'll move you up to the top, Erica. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Erica Legursky. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor for Governor Gordon. The First Lady sends her regrets and she wishes that she could be here today to present her budget to you. However, I will be doing that for her. We wish her the best and hope she's feeling better. If we want to go to the step 2 cuts that the governor had asked for all agencies was up to 10%. The resident budget cuts was 9.9 in step 2. These reductions have already been implemented in the B11 process. Step 3, which include the supplemental budget that's in the budget book that would be implemented in July 1 if those should be approved, the governor's residence had an additional 10% in there. The governor's residence operates on a biennial budget of $588,180 with 2 full-time staff. With the proposed reductions in the budget book, the office would operate on $500,191 and 2 full-time staff. The governor's residence includes both public and private use areas. Mr. Chairman, unless you have any questions on that, I'll just kind of go through like we've been going step by step through the budget book on those pages.
Go ahead, Erica.
Okay. If you'd like to turn to page 3, this just shows kind of an outline of what I just went over of the 588,000 and then the reduction to the 500, 191 and the 2 staff. If you turn to page 4, these are items that have already been discussed, and this was here, in the previous supplemental budget book. So unless there's no questions on page 4, I'll just go ahead and skip over that.
Keep going.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, if we would look at page 5, this is the table that shows the governor's residence and their 2 primary focuses. They have the governor's residence operation budget and then also the China food service equipment and repair replacement budget. If we would like to turn to page 6, this is the original step 2 reduction that they had in the operations budget of $58,326. And I'll go over that in detail in here in a minute. On page 7, it shows the step 3 reductions that they have. They have 8 priority reductions that they did, which totaled $59,325. If there's no questions on those tables, I'll just take you to page 9.
Keep going.
Okay, page 9 is the step 2 priority number 1 reduction. It's unit 0101, governor's residence operations. This is where it shows the reduction of the $58,326. The governor's residence is recommending a reduction in contract services by eliminating unneeded contract positions. This reductions will inhibit the ability to hire qualified caterers and staff for official state functions. If there's no questions on that, if we want to go to page 10, this is a little different. So you'll see on the table, we had 8 priority reductions in their step 3 Really, priority number 1 through priority number 7 can be combined. They're all unit 0101 reductions totaling $54,400. Just to kind of walk through those, they have utilities being reduced by $2,000, dues and licenses and registration reduced by $2,000, in-state travel being reduced by $3,000, out-of-state travel reduced by $6,400, food service supplies being reduced by $10,000, equipment rental being reduced by $1,000, and then contract services being reduced by $30,000. These reductions in the governor's residence may restrict the ability for the First Lady and staff to travel in-state and out-of-state on official business. It also limits the residence in its capacity to hire qualified caterers and servers for the official state business and to contract with other professional services for anything that the residency may require. So those 3 reductions, or excuse me, those 7 reductions you'll see kind of lumped together.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Representative Walters. Mr. Chairman, my question for you, Erica, is on the utilities. To find $2,000 in savings in your utilities, knowing that the residence is just one building, is that really a feasible place to find a reduction? I appreciate it, but I don't know how feasible it is. And if so, has there really been that much fluff in that line item?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, if you don't mind on that one, if I could get back to the residents on that, and then I can follow up with you on that question. I don't know the specific details of the excess in that account.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That sounds good. I just noticed that that's almost a 50% reduction in their utilities, and I'd hope they don't stop watering the lawn or turning on the lights occasionally.
Go ahead, Erica.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you would like to turn to page 13, this is the last budget reduction that the governor's residence had. This is budget reduction step 3, number 8. And this is the elimination of the China and food service supplies replacement budget. The reduction in the China replacement budget that was established in Session Law 2005, Chapter 91, will eliminate the vehicle to replace and to repair crystal, China, and food service supplies at the residence. I do know that the governor and the First Lady had conversations about this, and it's my understanding that with the elimination of that budget, that if things are broken or if something needs to be replaced, that they would carefully consider, does that need to be replaced, and could that possibly then just be taken out of their main budget where they do have some money in that 200 series. And with that, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, that's the presentation of the governor's residency budget. If you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer those, or I can definitely get with the First Lady and Trista and get you back those answers.
Committee, any questions? All right, Erica, thank you. I think we're going to move on down the agenda. Next item we have on the agenda is Secretary of State Buchanan. I'm trying to see if he's on here yet.
Vice Chairman Hicks, it appears that we had them on, but they might be having some trouble with their feed. So if you'll just give them a couple more minutes, we'll see if we can get them back on.
All right, thank you, Karen.
Mr. Chairman.
Yep, Kevin.
The issue on positions in the Homeland Security was rounding. I'll get you the 2 units that had the half a position in there. It's just how IBARs work, but I'll get you the information. I'll send that over to Don so you can see how that reconciles. It is correct. It's simply rounding a half position in 2 different units.
And Kevin, is that because we went from a full-time employee to part-times that we've got the round here?
They cut a half a position in 2 separate units, and that one that got the negative or the parentheses around it, it shows, that's what led me to understand that. But I'll send you both the units where they're being impacted.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Secretary of State Buchanan, I saw you there for a minute. The floor is yours. You want to present us your budget? Can you hear us, Ed?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I'm getting another feed, so I'm shutting that off. So it's just the committee and myself.
Okay, yeah, that'll clear it up.
And now I think we've got it. And then we'll be right back with you here. There we go. I'll do more here. Now I'm just trying to get this so I've got all of you up here at once here. All right. Can you hear me okay, Mr. Chairman?
Yep,
And
go
see
ahead,
me
Ed.
okay?
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, as well as a hello to the incoming members of the committee. Today, I have with me my deputy Karen Wheeler and some other folks in the office. Due to the logistics today, they can't all be on camera with me. I'll start off my presentation with a little bit of good news. Just want the committee to know, especially the new members, our numbers for fiscal year 20 ended up being about $57.5 million to the general fund. So there's some good news going towards the future, given the circumstances we face. I'd also like the committee to know that we are undertaking a fee review, if you will, to be able to make recommendations to the committee in the near future. We have about 214 different fees that our office is responsible for administrating, and we're undertaking a review of those fees everywhere from business to notaries and on down the line to some things you've probably never even heard about that go back probably 20 or 30 years. And so that'll be forthcoming. And the reason I mention that is because that's something that we may be able, excuse me, to squeeze some more revenue out of without jeopardizing our office's mission or jeopardizing the popularity of Wyoming when it comes to business formation, which, as you know, that $57.5 million is primarily driven through our business division. If there are no questions really with regard to round one of the budget cuts, the meat of these things is obviously in step two of the reduction, and I would direct the committee to page 8. I'd like to go unit by unit, and I'll go as quickly as I can. Mr. Chairman, if you want me to speed up or do it a different way, just please interrupt and let me know.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead,
Representative Summers. Secretary of State Buchanan, just a quick note, kind of on your page 3 summary page, and it'll be similar to other, I guess it's concerns I always have when I look at these budgets. You've cut less than 1% out of your 100 series. So as you move through your budget, talk about why you chose the pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, that you chose and left others kind of alone. So just kind of, as you move through, mention that. Thank you.
Sure. And maybe I'll start, Representative Summers, Mr. Chairman, with an overview of that before I go through. Our agency our duties and our mission is primarily statutorily driven. And so when we look to make budget cuts, they have to be very surgical. We don't have a lot of areas where we have, huge budget amounts. And so, Representative Summers, when you speak to that, you'll notice one of the biggest areas is maintenance. And so as I go through here, I'll talk about that a little bit. So as you look at page 8 on the left-hand side of the priorities here, numbers 3 and numbers 7 deal with our securities division, and that is treated separately. So I'm going to talk about priorities 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 8 first, and then I'll take you to the where the securities portion is by page number. First off was priority 1, and this was a reduction in communications printing and mailing notifications. In general, this regards the statutory mailings that we have to undertake on a really a daily basis, if you will. And as you can see, that's $157,000. That is dependent on legislative action. If that comes to fruition, we will need to discuss on this particular line item. Right now, that cut has been accepted, but because we're in the current biennium and we are still, fulfilling our statutory duties and making those mailings, we are still expending those funds. So just for the committee to know, if we don't see legislative action that allows us to move away from these mailings, we will need that money to continue that duty. That is something that does affect the public, but it's an efficiency that we thought could be utilized in meeting that first round of 10% cuts. That's a policy decision on the legislature's part, but I wanted you to know that those are monies that we would ask for to come back if the legislation doesn't change, allowing us to no longer mail out hard copies to our customers.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Secretary, so Ed, that's legislation that's already drafted, and what committee is it sitting in?
It's in joint corporations, Representative Nicholas.
And so you've reviewed that legislation, and it's in terms of when that goes into effect, in terms of when when you have to stop mailing. I just want to make sure you have sufficient funds for, even if it goes into effect, you have sufficient funds to do the mailing up until the statute goes into the modification of the statute goes into effect.
Yes, and if I understand you correctly, yes, we would be okay up to that point. So I guess we're probably guessing end of fiscal year.
Well, and if for some reason the legislation doesn't get out of corporations, let us know, because we can bring it back to life if we need to.
And we will definitely do that, and I appreciate that because we definitely, that would be a huge undertaking without those funds. So thank you for that.
You bet.
Priority number 2 was.
Ed, hold on a second.
Oh, go ahead.
Senator Kinski.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. Do you have authority under existing statute to ask the customers if they'd like to opt out of the mailing and just default to email?
We do have that ability in some statutes, but it's not universal. And so we would definitely have to kind of work our way through that process to be able to see how popular or how accepting the public would be with that change.
Mr. Chairman?
I could get you the details on that, Senator, if you'd like me to.
Mr. Chairman?
Follow up.
No, Ed, I don't need it. I don't need any follow-up. I just, my wife and I, every time we get the option to not receive something by mail and go to email, we have a business email address. We do that. We've just got so much paper, and if you've got statutory authority, or if you can look at it through that lens, you might just go ahead and ask everybody. You might get rid of 80% of that expense without any further statutory change. It's just a thought, that's all.
Thank you for
another
that.
question, Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Buchanan, thanks for coming in today. Secretary Buchanan, quick question about that. Several years ago, I think you were probably still in the House then, might have been Speaker, that one of your predecessors reduced the notifications as a part of some budget cutting measures. And I was just wondering, has there been a review or of when that happened to see if the cost saving measures resulted where ended up in a net gain or a net loss of filings and refilings because people didn't have the notice, so they didn't make their their annual renewals or whatever else the requirement was on time. Anyway, just wondered if you had any information on that.
I don't know if I'm familiar with what you're talking about, going from certified mailings to first class postage, but I think your ultimate question is did that affect our office as far as folks doing business with us such that it affected the bottom line, if I understand. And I don't have that information off the top of my head, Senator, but and I don't know that I can get it, but I will try to see if I can analyze that, because I know going forward that would be something useful to especially joint corporations and whether or not they want to consider this new legislation with regard to statutory mailings.
All right, if there's no more questions there, Ed, go ahead and proceed. I think we're on page 10.
We are on step 2, which was the reduction of $184,604. That's voter registration and temporary contracts.
What page are you on, Ed?
If you go to page 14, you will find that in the narrative there. And I apologize. I'll start giving you the page numbers as I hit those.
All right, thank you.
And you can see that. Number 4, that is on page 15, and that is a reduction to our maintenance agreements that I mentioned earlier. That's $309,000. That's basically, that was required to even get us close to 10%. As you can see, that's by far the largest of our cuts. I want to make the comment at this time that especially for new committee members, in understanding that everything our office does is highly driven by technology, and we have about 10 custom applications along with everything that goes along with those applications, really to do our job, and we host 9 different websites. And so maintenance is a huge driver for us. And so what the 309,000 represents is a very surgical, careful cut to those maintenance dollars, such that we feel that we can carry on through the remainder of the biennium, recognizing that we have the flexibility to come back next year for the new biennium if we have to. We also have the flexibility, I think, if we get in a bind with the B11 process. But that is by far the biggest reduction that you'll see in this step 2 to get us to help get us to the 10%. Moving on to number 5, that is on starting on the bottom of page 15, but the meat of it is on page 16. These were things where we really found efficiencies. You go from drinking water to subscriptions. We went down to 1 copy machine and some other things. So that's what comprises the $60,200 there. Number 6 is a reduction in overtime monies. We've moved to basically, I'm missing the word. Comp time to make up for overtime. That's a reduction of about a little over $23,000. And then number 8, you can see that on page 17.
Mr. Chairman, this is Representative Summers. Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Secretary Buchanan, and maybe, I don't know if Kevin Hibbard's still in now, but I don't recall seeing a budget, an overtime budget reduction in a supplemental, even during the last cuts. And just a quick question, Secretary Buchanan, why Kevin's on board here is this been common practiced in the past, and how much overtime do we have in the state, and how much is cut in this budget through this type of measure?
And Representative Summers and Mr. Chairman, for our office, I think it's something new for us because we just found a way to do things a different way. But Mr. Hibbard would have to answer the question on a broader scale.
Mr. Chairman, in 2016, there was a significant amount of areas where we chased overtime. The relationship of overtime or in comp time, the case where you don't get overtime. We can provide you a report across the expanse of the enterprise where we currently have any dollars that are associated in overtime that remain in agencies' budgets. And then naturally, we would want to include in that report any reductions in step 2 or step 3 in accordance to that. But like I said, there was a significant amount of money that we chased out of the budgets in previous challenges that we've had with revenue.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Kevin, I appreciate that. You know, we all know in corrections that they have a lot of, you know, this is outside of this budget, but we know they have a lot of overtime. They need overtime. They use it. But when I start seeing reductions like this, you know, I wonder in every 100 series, then how much is overtime, and should we be doing overtime as a state right now, or not doing overtime, and what is the most
Mr. Chairman,
means?
Mr. Chairman, even in the case of corrections, we've gone from actually having an overtime budget to managing their overtime through vacancy savings that the agency has, rather than standing up a budget on the front end of the period. We look to say, okay, we know we're going to experience vacancies. Let's make those reductions in accordance to that. And that's what we have done in the past. But what I can do is I can get a report for you across the expanse of the enterprise where we have overtime and how it's funded. Like we talked about earlier, is it federally funded, is it special revenue, or is it generally funded? I can provide you that. But like I said before, in every time we've ran this iteration, there's been more and more reductions in overtime, and even in the state auditor's office in the past, and across the expanse of the enterprise, those were the places where we chased first.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you. Kevin, can you help me understand a little bit on the legalities of all of that? So if I'm an employee and the agency I work for needs me to work overtime, what if I would prefer to get paid rather than time? Do I have a choice in that if I'm required to work it? Tell me how all of that works.
Mr. Chairman, I'll do my best, but as Trish Bach and HR will be on later in the afternoon, they can probably back clean up. The first is if you're classified as a non-exempt or exempt employee, whether or not you get overtime or not. For example, myself, I do not. Then after that is it's the decision that's being made by the agency. Can they afford to pay the overtime or not? If they can't, then they don't perform it. And then what we've done since like 2016, like I gave an example in the Department of Corrections, is cutting the actual budget object itself where agencies have overtime, and then allowing them to use their vacancy savings to pay for those overtime events when they happen to manage their budget. That's the preference that we've gravitated to. But the final answer is if an employee is qualified for overtime and works overtime, we pay them that overtime.
They're not required to take, Mr. Chairman, they're not required to take comp time.
I think there's places in certain agencies where they have a choice of comp time versus overtime. But if you don't use that comp time, for example, in YDOT's case with snowplow drivers, then you get paid for it once a year. It doesn't, you don't get to cross bienniums without being paid.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right, Ed, back to you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm on priority number 8 now, which is page 17 in the narrative. If you want to look at that, And that is a reduction of almost $55,000. And that's basically our travel budget. I cut that extensively. I think, gosh, I don't even know. I had almost a $45,000 cut. That's for in-state and out-of-state travel. You can see the reduction impact there. But we're hoping that, like within the office, that will allow us to get to the meetings that we need to get to. You know, we thought going forward, you don't know how long COVID lasts, how long we're going to be doing virtual meetings, et cetera. So that was our an effort really to hopefully need less travel money, both in-state and out-of-state. So that's been cut all the way down there to $7,500 in-state, $7,500 out-of-state, as compared to before, which was 35,000 and 24,000. So that's a pretty big reduction there. Now I want to move. I told you I would go back to priorities 3 and 7 because those affect our securities division. So if you go back to priority number 3, you see that $40,000 cut. That is referenced on page 25 of your narrative. And you can see there that that's basically for retainage of auditors and hearing officers if we have some fraudulent cases arise that require resources beyond the office's resources. And then number 7 is also securities, as I mentioned. That's their travel budget. $8,500. That's referenced on page 26, that next page. And that's 100% special revenue, and it's $8,500. As you can see there, for both in-state and out-of-state, a total of $8,500. So those priority cuts make up the $838,157 for our 10% cuts in step 2. And if there are any questions on that, I will wait before proceeding to step 3.
Go ahead, Ed. Step 3.
All right. Step 3. Step 3 is not 10%. When I approached the first 10%, I told staff that I want, the governor asked for 10%. I knew appropriations would be looking for those cuts as well. And I really felt like we could find the efficiencies to meet that mark, which we did. I got to step 3 and I arrived at about 1.9% in cuts. I had conversations with the governor about this third round of, or second round of 10% cuts, if you will. And just like in step 2, the majority of cuts, that the only place I could really take that from would be from our maintenance funds. And as I also mentioned in step 2, those were very surgical. And I just cannot, in good conscience, cut more from our maintenance funding for our systems, because that's what makes the state money. That's what that contributes to the general fund, and that's what makes our office run like it does. Now, having said that, we went back into, as you can see there, these first 2, if you want to stay in this area, are both securities. So if you look at page 27, it speaks to both priorities 1 and 2, and we were able to take out in the 200 series $9,600, and in the 400 series $1,000. You can see with these cuts, we're really digging deep to try to find something that we can live without, that doesn't affect our mission significantly. Number 3 there, that's a good illustration of what I'm saying. Our duties are statutorily driven, and so for lobbyists, for example, we're required to, we're in charge of registration of lobbyists. That changed in Diana Oman's era when she was here. But for example, nothing in statute says that we have to make them badges or or keep databases and those types of things. And so we're able to get rid of that function, and we'll have to tell the lobbyist organization they can do their own badges. We won't need the printers or the things and the materials to do that anymore. Also, this includes statutes. I will give up our printed statutes and we'll get those online, but that's what makes up that $4,400 you see there in priority number 3. And then number 4 really is illustrative of how far we've had to reach down to give up some of our fax capability, $726, to really scrape the bottom of the barrel here to give additional cuts beyond the step 2 cuts. So that one is short and sweet on step 3.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Go ahead.
So thank you, Secretary Buchanan. So what I want to do is try to set you up with a bunch of softballs to get to where we want to go here, because it's going to be my recommendation when we go to a markup that we actually add to your budget. But I want to ask you a few questions to get there. So the first one I want to ask is, so obviously you didn't take any cut in personnel. And what I'd like you to do, and I met with you last week and kind of walked through all these in detail, but explain to the JAC, if you will, why it is that it's not reasonably practical for you to cut personnel from your existing staff.
Thank you for the question. Basically, it's probably 2 or 3-fold. First off, we're a small agency. We've got 31 total employees. We gave up a position 2015, I want to say, and we've never filled that position. Instead, we've relied upon temporary some money to have temps to come in and help us when we need that help. And the other thing you need to know, and understanding why personnel is so essential and what we have we need to keep, is right now, to meet our statutory obligations with business filings, I rely on my executive assistant. We've trained up people from my secretary clear over to the securities division to process business applications to help us meet our 15-day statutory requirement. And so as you see the filings increase from the business division, we're working harder with the same amount of people, and we're happy to do that because that's an efficiency. We've termed it all hands on deck, and nearly everyone in the office now is trained up in how to process business applications. And it's been especially difficult, or challenging, I should say, in the COVID era, because we've got folks teleworking and you can only do so much on a telework basis. The same thing holds true with elections. In the weeks leading up to elections, again, my executive assistant is here on election night, and I'm here on election night, and securities folks are here on election night. It's not just our election division, which, by the way, is only 3 people, one of which is pretty much only federally funded, to run our entire elections division. And so that's why on a personnel side, you haven't seen any positions offered up, because in my opinion, we're as lean as we can be. And proof of that is that I take people from every division to do the work of other divisions within this office to make sure we get the job done.
Just a few follow-ups, Mr. Co-Chair. So last session, you asked for a supplement, or you asked for an exception request, and I think we cut that in half. I'm trying to recall what that was for.
You did. That was, we got $81,000 for hardware and software for the office, and that was the 50% reduction in what we had asked for.
So, when you submit your LLC and your corporate filings and your annual filings. Typically, those require the corporations to disclose a valuation of their assets. And so how many of those do you receive a year?
In total, like annual reports?
Yeah.
I've got a book right here with it. Just give me. Gotcha. So I've got, Representative, I've got 138,000 for domestic business entities. This was what was filed in fiscal year 2020. And for foreign, it was 19,000.
And so how about LLCs?
Total LLCs filed?
Correct.
Okay, we have a total from January 1st of this year to October 31st of 46,505 brand new entities.
So, Ed, do you have any mechanism to evaluate or do any type of auditing of the valuations of any of those corporations or LLCs when they make their annual or initial filings?
That's a great question. When I came into the office, I wondered the same thing, like how do you evaluate those assessment forms to ensure that companies are reporting their true asset values? And the answer is we have the statutory authority, but we don't have the manpower nor the resources to do that in any meaningful way.
Yeah, and so then I see that in your budget request, you're cutting some security dollars. Does that impact your ability to go after bad actors or even to locate bad actors?
It does. If you look at the narrative, I want to say it's on page 25 or yeah, for contractual services right there on page 25, Mr. Chairman, you can see there that was utilized for retainage of auditors or hearing officers if you had a fraudulent case arise, because there's no way in the securities division that we can send people out on near enough regular basis. And in the past, the office would hire, I think had pretty much not full time, but a significant amount of time contractually for an investigator that went out and built cases against the fraudulent actors so that we could take those folks to court, with the prosecutors and develop evidence to prove a case. That goes away with all this.
So, I think that might be useful for JAC and hopefully for corporations. Hopefully they're asking those questions as well, as to what you would need to fully perform the functions that in terms of personnel and or resources to ensure compliance with our corporate and our LLC filings and to properly pursue those, and what types of resources you need to do that. I just think that would be a useful exercise. And then my next point is that I want you to talk a little bit about what you started off with, because it occurs to me, and you and I, and your office with Karen's assistance provided kind of a breakdown of what the charges are, the annual charges of the LLCs and the corporations, the number of those filings and the revenues that are derived from those. And I think we've made those available to Dawn. I'm not sure if those have been circulated yet, but the point of you providing that to me and for me to the LSO is that we want to do an evaluation because we're in the process of drafting several different fee bills. And I ask for your assistance to come up with what we can raise in fees that won't impede our ability to, to be a good provider and a low cost destination for LLCs and corporations, because that brings in revenue. And it looked like that, for example, that our competition around the state, all the states that are near us, and really almost in the United States, is South Dakota, Nevada, and I think obviously Delaware, but a few of those states, but those are around us locally, it's primarily South Dakota. Is that fair?
Yeah, Mr. That's very, very accurate. Delaware's an anomaly because Delaware's been doing it for 1,000 years and for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
But South Dakota and Nevada, but primarily South Dakota, would be an apples to apples comparison of fee structures when it comes to business formation.
Yeah, it's what I think what we talked about is that we could actually raise our fees by $5 or $10 in some locations and still be below South Dakota. And by doing that, we can probably come up with anywhere between $1 million to $3 million additional revenues for the general fund. And so hopefully we can put that together and work with you on those fees. And then as part of those fees that we generate, I'm hoping that we can maybe direct some more monies back to your office to help you fulfill your obligations. But so I just kind of bring this up to the committee so to be ready for this as this thing develops over time. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Go
ahead. Secretary Buchanan, thank you so much. And what I appreciate about your agency is that for every dollar you're spending, you're generating $6.70 for the general fund. So I think we want to make sure that you have the resources to keep doing that. And I echo the comments of the co-chairman about getting these annual reports, if you had the tools to make them accurate, even, for example, by cross-referencing county assessor records for the value of the land that these LLCs own. Just a cursory review of a couple of entities I'm familiar with would indicate that if you trued up the county assessed value and used that as a measure of valuation for the annual reports, it would substantially increase the fees, annual fees due by these companies.
Representative, that's Mr. Chairman, that's correct, and that would be that would be great if we had the tools to do that, because I think what you're saying is very true. And to Chairman Nicholas's point, that you can take a look at the fee structure as well as the minimum fee, perhaps on the annual fee, on the annual report fee, and still be very competitive. The caveat to all this, and the chairman mentioned it, is it's a delicate balance. I've said that before. It's a policy decision that the legislature makes, and I can tell by the comments of the members of JAC, they're very aware that we have to be very careful in this area. But I agree that there can be a more contemporary structure in place that would bring us, into 2020. I mean, we've got fees on the books. I mentioned we have 214 different fees we charge, and a lot of them are very, peripheral and esoteric. However, they haven't been touched in decades, and they're ridiculously low, quite honestly. So
Mr. Chairman,
this is an endeavor we'd like to undertake, in all of those suggestions by Representative Stiff and Chairman Nicholas.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, thank you again, Secretary Buchanan. And, I agree on raising the fees. We have to be competitive, but this idea that we're not collecting what's owed, that makes all of us that are LLC owners that are paying, the right fee, it becomes unfair, right? If we're not adequately auditing our books, then those people that are doing the right thing are less inclined to do the right thing, because They don't have to. Nobody's checking them. So I agree on increasing fees, but on going after bad actors, we have to figure out a way to do that.
Representative Summers, that's right on the money. And it also holds true for the ability to be able to audit commercial registered agents as well. That's a whole nother thing too from the business division, that there's bad actors in all directions, and it's been my observation that we haven't had, nor will we now have, the resources even close to do an adequate job in policing those folks, so that you don't have businesses that are fraudsters, and just exactly what you said.
All right, we're going to go to Senator Perkins, and then we'll go to Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Secretary Buchanan, along that same line, well, in fact, let me just give you a background. Years ago, early in my career, I did a number of where I represented taxpayers against the federal government, and I remember going to an educational program, and there was this guy who just had this innocuous title of senior attorney with the Internal Revenue Service. And anyway, long story short, his office and he in particular were responsible for the criminal and civil investigations and prosecution of the Internal Revenue Service. And he told us that they had looked at these things and that they needed between 11 and 1,500 criminal prosecutions a year in order to maintain the fear of God enough for people to be compliant with the tax system. And so that kind of brings us to this discussion we had, whether people are paying the right amount of franchise tax related to their corporation or their LLC, or whether they're violating securities rules of our state in trying to raise money from people. How many do we have, or during your term, do we have any active investigations in those other areas besides the ones we've just talked about that help with enforcement and compliance with the statutes and the benefits of doing business in Wyoming?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Perkins, currently, and since I've been in office, there have been no investigations, no cases. I shouldn't say investigation, no current cases going on. And that is a function of, we do not, unless somebody complains and we follow up and follow it down, do you ever see something that we have the ability to refer to the U.S. Attorney's Office?
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, my question for you is on page 16, and it's regarding the utilities reduction of $4,000. That's your entire utilities budget. And I'm just, all the other items in that, you leave a little bit in the account, yet the utilities you zero out. And so I'm wondering if you are planning to work in the dark going forward, or what your thoughts are on fully reducing all of your utilities.
Thank you for the question. I'm getting to the page here.
Page 16, as I said. Sorry if I went too fast.
No, I heard 16, but my fingers weren't moving as fast. That alone is the utilities for the water service. Is that right? Yeah. So when we moved into the Hirschler, we have water fountains that fill up water bottles, and we were previously over on Cary Avenue, 2020 Cary Avenue, and the water was just absolutely horrendous. And so we had Culligan Water Service. So when we came over to the Hirschler, that's one of the things we identified that we're going to do without, because we have ostensibly better water here. And we have ability to fill up individual water bottles with these new water fountains. So that's all that is. It's not I'm not really sure why it's called utilities, because I think I had that question when I first saw that too, Representative. But it's not the electricity.
I think you have pre-filtered water there, Mr. Secretary.
Well, exactly. So that $4,000 is a water service.
Okay, that, yeah, it's represented on page 21 still as utilities, and that's where you're zeroing out all of your utilities. So I don't know where you pay your light bills. I know that it's somewhat of an enterprise system as you pay A&I for certain services, and I understand that is your water that was being paid, but somewhere there's been a misclassification of where the water was being paid from, or the water services when you were at 2020 carry, and where it is here in the Series 200s, because there are other places that water could have been paid from. And so it's just kind of I know it's only $4,000, but it's a head scratcher of misclassifications here.
Yeah, no, I've been out of the legislature for 10 years now, and then trying to work my way back into budgets. And I probably had the same question at some point. So.
Thank you. Hope you can keep the lights on.
Thank you, Representative Walters.
I'm just glad Cheyenne gets all that good Snake River water over here with that trans-basin diversion. So that's where that high quality water comes from. One real quick point, Ed, just to point out a little discrepancy in your budget on page 15 and your section C. You indicate that you're going to backfill those funds with federal dollars, but it doesn't show any appropriation in the budget for those federal dollars. That's just I think it's a clerical issue that we need to clean up. And I think Kevin, if he's listening, we just need to make sure that that's reflected in your budget.
I'll work with Karen on that and see that if it's a necessity to add federal funds for it, or whether it is just using existing federal funds, which is my hunch.
Yeah,
but Karen and I will sort that out.
All right, thanks, Kevin. All right, Ed, anything else we've got?
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you, both chairman and members of the committee and the incoming members for your time.
All right, well, thank you, Ed. We're going to close out this section of the Secretary of State's office. We're going to recess for lunch for 1 hour. We will reconvene at 1:30.
So, Mr. Co-Chair, before we recess,
yep,
I kind of want to have a discussion with LSO about our budget books, because I know that Don, now that we're starting to work with them and going through this process, I wish we would have called Kinko back and demanded that they provide us with new ones ASAP that we could have by the end of the week. But it's really a tedious task for any of those who are using the hardbounds. I mean, I'm flipping here back and forth and back and forth, and I get lost. And in addition to that, when I went through some of these budgets, I use the LSO website, and the pages are different. And so now I've got marked up budgets where the pages are different for what I copied down and from PDFs, and then I've got back and forth flip tops on this, and I'm just going, oh, this is going to be a fun week. But I don't know. Any feedback on that, Don, or go ahead?
Yeah, a couple of items. Number one, this was a delayed printing, and it was reversed. And so we pulled the trigger last week. The printer has replaced all of those copies. So we have a list of individuals who want replacement copies. You're just down the hall, so we have your new copy immediately available here. I think that can be addressed relatively directly. With respect to the differences in page numberings, that is the first I've heard of it, and that's a little bit more concerning. If you have any example of that, we will track that down and see why the difference is.
Well, my Secretary of State that I have on my computer, maybe I was just looking at the wrong ones. It's 20 pages, not 30 pages, because it takes out the narrative between page 4 and 10, basically.
All
Mr.
right.
Chairman,
Noted. Kevin, go ahead.
we also have a compendium that's posted on our Wyoming Budget Department website, and it has a active agenda where you can just click on the agency itself. It's out there, and I've been using that, and I have not seen any issues with page numbering on our compendium. I think LSO has already provided you something similar to our compendium. But the nice part about our compendium is, and I haven't seen LSOs, is that you can go to the table of contents and click on the agency. It takes you right there, and then you can just move forward with it.
Don, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I believe you are looking at the August step 2 reductions on your computer as opposed to the November supplemental budget. That is the difference between the Secretary of State's issue.
Representative Simpson.
Members, I discovered when Don sent us the file of the budget and recommended we download it onto our computers, I did that, and it really is working fine. What I've discovered, if I put my hard copy here, I follow the odd pages and I follow the even pages on my extra monitor. So I don't have to go back and forth every single page in it. It makes it so that I can at least make written comments on my odd pages, but that helps a little bit in the interim.
Well, that's easy for you guys that don't have to stare here and look at all you folks here to run this meeting, but it is very cumbersome to sit here and try to switch this thing around and keep track of who's speaking and where we're at within the budget and the page number. But that being said, if this is the most difficult thing that we have to overcome, just be thankful, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, anybody else have any comments?
And Mr. Chairman, this is Representative Summers. Just a quick note, and I think everybody knows it, but if you download what Dawn gave us, you can do comments right inside, right on those documents. And it works actually much faster than I thought. I thought I wouldn't be able to handle that, but it's doable the way if you use the downloaded version.
So Representative Summers, what's a download? We're going to break for lunch if there's no more comments. All right, we'll see you back in 1 hour.
Thanks.